The last shop was supposed to be the easy one. Harry had survived Gringotts, the cart, the plummeting drop, the vault that turned out to hold more gold than he had ever seen and apparently belonged to him. And he had survived Madame Malkin's, where a blonde boy had talked at him about broomsticks and Quidditch and the superiority of certain families, until Harry had nodded politely and felt nothing, because all of it was in a language he still hadn't learned to speak. He had survived the bookshop and the apothecary and the owl emporium, where a snowy white owl had stared at him through the bars of her cage with such composed authority that he'd bought her before Hagrid could finish suggesting it. He was, by the time they stopped in front of Ollivander's, almost numb with the effort of absorbing it all. A whole world. One morning. His entire life rewritten in a single conversation over Hagrid's birthday cake. The shop was small, narrower than it looked, the window holding only a single wand on a faded purple cushion, as though daring you to find it impressive. Harry looked at it for a moment, and thought about how many days he'd spent looking at nothing in particular because there was nothing in his cupboard worth looking at. He didn't say this. He was becoming practiced at not saying things. Hagrid had to wait outside. He was too big for the shop, and Harry understood suddenly, stepping through the door alone, that this part was his. The inside smelled of sawdust and something older. Cedar, perhaps, or something that had no name he knew. Thousands of narrow boxes were stacked from floor to ceiling, on shelves so tall Harry couldn't see where they ended. The boxes were dusty with a quality of dust that suggested decades rather than neglect. Not abandoned, just very, very old. Harry stood in the center of the room and heard absolute silence. "I wondered when I'd be seeing you." Harry spun. The man had appeared from nowhere, or seemed to, the way some things in this new world seemed to materialize out of the space where they hadn't been a moment before. He was old, slight, moving without any sound Harry could identify, and his eyes were extraordinary, large and pale silver, almost colorless, and they found Harry's face and stayed there with a quality of attention that made Harry feel, uncomfortably, like something being read. Harry Potter. The old man said it the way he might have said the title of a book he'd been waiting a long time to open. "I thought I'd be seeing you soon. Your parents were customers of mine." Harry did not move. The silver eyes moved across his face with practiced efficiency, noting the shape of it, noting his scar, noting his glasses, noting something Harry couldn't name, but which felt like the man was measuring him against a memory. "Your mother now." The man turned, drifting toward his shelves with the unhurried ease of someone who had nowhere else to be. "Your mother was in here almost exactly 20 years ago. I remember it very well. Difficult customer. Tried a great number of wands before we found a match." He paused on this with the slight brightness of someone recalling a challenge survived. 10¼ inches long, swishy, made of willow. Nice wand for charm work. The words landed in Harry's chest and sat there. He hadn't expected that. He hadn't expected to feel anything in particular in a wand shop, and he hadn't expected to hear his mother described. Not as a martyr, not as a legend, not as the woman who died so he could live, but as a difficult customer who needed a lot of tries, and finally matched with a willow wand that was nice for charm work. Ollivander had already moved on. "And your father? Mahogany, 11 inches, pliable, rather good for transfiguration. A different look, briefer. And then, of course, your scar." He came back around to face Harry. "I'm sorry to say I sold the wand that did that. 13½ inches. Powerful wand. Very powerful. And the core, well," he seemed to taste the thought before setting it aside. "We shall speak of that in a moment. Perhaps. Or perhaps not. Shall we find your wand, Mr. Potter?" What followed was a cascade of boxes and mismatches, each wand tried and rejected in the space of a second, each failure deepening Ollivander's visible satisfaction. He was pleased by the difficulty, Harry realized. Not sadistically, but in the way a man is pleased when a puzzle proves worthy of him. The maple one produced sparks that fizzed and expired. The ebony one with the unicorn hair made Harry feel, briefly, as though he were standing under water. One after another, while Ollivander grew livelier, and the pile on the counter grew higher, and then the holly wand, 11 inches, phoenix feather, supple. Harry took it the way he'd taken all the others, ready to try it and put it back, and swung it, and the room erupted in red and gold light. Sparks shot from the end of the wand like a signal flare, like something launched and joyful, and the feeling up Harry's arm was warmth and rightness, and something that might have been the closest thing to belonging he'd felt all day. Ollivander was almost clapping. "Oh, bravo! Yes, yes, quite right. And I think we know why. Curious. Very curious." "Sorry," Harry said. "What's curious?" "I remember every wand I have ever sold, Mr. Potter. Every single one. This wand, holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, shares a core with one other wand. One only. The wand whose work you carry on your forehead." The old man's silver eyes held him with an intensity that was neither unkind nor comfortable. "Curious, don't you think?" Ollivander reached for wrapping paper. "Wait," Harry said. His own voice surprised him. It was quiet and certain, which didn't match how he felt, which was confused, and 11 years old and suddenly aware that something about the last 2 minutes mattered in a way he couldn't yet name. Ollivander went still. "My mother's wand," Harry said. "The willow one. Could I ask about that one instead?" The silence in the shop took on a different quality. "You matched," Ollivander said, carefully. "This wand chose you. The sparks were—" "I know." Harry looked at the holly wand in his hand. It was warm. It was right. He could feel that it was right in the way you can feel a thing without being able to explain it. And that was exactly the problem. He didn't want to choose the right thing for reasons he didn't understand. He wanted to choose something he could trace back to himself, to something real. "But I'd like to ask about hers." Ollivander studied him the way he'd been studying him since Harry walked through the door, the silver eyes reading, measuring, placing Harry against something Harry couldn't see. Whatever he found, he did not name. "Lily Potter's wand," he said at last, "is not here." "I know that. She purchased it in 1971. She took it with her into her life, and—" a brief pause. "I do not know what became of it after she died. It was not returned to me." Another pause, this one longer, with something careful in it. "The world is not always tidy about returning things." Harry nodded. He hadn't expected the wand to be here. He wasn't sure what he had expected. He said, "Could you make one like it? Willow? Like hers?" Ollivander looked at him for a long moment. In the silence, Harry could hear the faint creak of old wood expanding, the settling of the building around its thousands of boxes. "I can try," Ollivander said finally, "but you must understand what that means. I cannot simply build your mother's wand and hand it to you. I can select a willow wood and match it with a core. Whether the result chooses you, that is not within my gift to guarantee." He said it with precise, unhurried weight, the way someone gives a warning they expect to be heard. "The wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter. I cannot choose on its behalf." "I understand," Harry said. He set the holly wand down on the counter. Ollivander looked at it sitting there, the wand that had just chosen Harry, unmistakably, with sparks and light and warmth, and his expression did something complicated, that Harry wasn't old enough to read. Then he turned and walked into the back of the shop and disappeared between the shelves. Harry waited. He could hear sounds from the back, the movement of boxes, the scrape of something being drawn across a surface, the specific, focused quiet of someone doing close work. Not retrieving. Making. He understood after a moment that Ollivander was not going to his stock but to his workbench, that what Harry had asked for did not already exist and was being constructed now for him in the back of this narrow shop on a summer afternoon. The holly wand sat on the counter beside him. He didn't look at it. When Ollivander returned, he was carrying a wand that was paler than Harry would have expected. Pale and smooth, the willow wood almost blonde in the dusty light, with a weight that seemed slightly less than the holly wand's settled certainty. It did not look like much. Harry took it. No burst of sparks, no stream of light, no dramatic declaration from the universe. What happened was quieter than that. A warmth that spread from the handle up into Harry's palm, and then into his fingers, even and sustained, like the warmth of a held hand or a hearthstone that has been warm for hours rather than minutes. And then, not sparks, not fireworks, but a low, sustained trembling in the wood, as though the wand were breathing, as though it were settling, as though it had been waiting. Ollivander watched without speaking. He watched for a long moment, his pale eyes intent, and then he let out a slow, careful breath that Harry recognized, without knowing how he recognized it, as relief of some kind, or resolution. "Good," Ollivander said quietly. Yes. He took the wand back, and his hands moved over it once with an assessment Harry couldn't follow, and then he wrapped it with the same paper he'd have used for any other. Yes, that will do. He did not say it was curious. He thought it. Harry could see it in the way the silver eyes flicked to the holly wand, still sitting on the counter, and then away again. But he did not say it. He handed Harry the wrapped willow wand without fanfare, and named a price, and completed the transaction with the brisk efficiency of a man who had made a decision and intended to stand by it. Harry paid. He tucked the package under his arm. At the door, he stopped. He turned back, because something in the room still felt unfinished, though he couldn't have named what. The holly wand was already gone from the counter. Ollivander had put it back in its box and slid it onto its shelf somewhere in the stacked thousands, and Harry could not have said which shelf, and he thought, obscurely without knowing why, that it might stay there for a very long time, that it would sit in its box in the dark, waiting for something that might not come back for it. He did not ask. He walked out into the sunlight. Hagrid was exactly where he'd left him, enormous and patient on the step, and when Harry came through the door, Hagrid looked at the wrapped package and said, "Get a good one, did you?" in the tone of someone trying to be casual about something he wasn't sure how to ask about. "I think so," Harry said. Hagrid looked at him a moment longer, at his face, at the package, at his face again. He opened his mouth and then seemed to reconsider, and what he said instead was, "Your mum'd have been pleased, I reckon." "Willow, was it?" He said it with a kind of careful gentleness that told Harry he knew exactly what had just happened and was choosing not to make it large. She always was brilliant with a willow wand. Lovely caster. Harry nodded. He was not going to say anything about the thing sitting in his chest, the heavy, new, unnamed thing that had arrived somewhere between 10¼ inches, swishy, and the moment he walked out of the shop carrying something that had been, in some other form, in some other time, hers. He didn't have words for it yet. He had the wand. They walked back into the crowded brightness of Diagon Alley, and Harry kept his hand in his pocket with the wrapped package the whole way, and the willow wood was still faintly warm through the paper, and the name, Lily, sat in his chest like a stone he'd been carrying so long he'd stopped noticing its weight. Until now, the Dursleys had been glad to see him go. Not happy exactly. They were never happy in relation to Harry, not even about things that benefited them, but glad in the precise, relieved way of people who have carried a burden for 11 years and finally set it down. Uncle Vernon had said nothing at all driving to King's Cross, which was worse than him saying things. Aunt Petunia had given Harry a ham sandwich wrapped in cling film, which was, in its context, almost generous. Dudley had made a face at him through the car window as they drove away, and Harry had thought, yes, all right, that's probably right. He stood on the wrong side of the barrier at King's Cross, with his trolley and his owl and his trunk and the instructions Hagrid had given him, and he thought, I have to go through the wall, and Hagrid said it works, and I'm going to look absolutely insane if it doesn't. He went through the wall. It worked. Platform 9, 3 or, smelled of coal smoke and steam and the particular summer warmth of a metal roof holding heat from the morning sun. The Hogwarts Express was exactly as red and exact as something out of a postcard. Around it, families gathered in loose clusters, children being embraced, pointed at things, handed sandwiches, adults wearing cloaks in August, as though this were entirely ordinary, an owl somewhere making its feelings about the situation known at some length. Harry stood in the middle of all of it and pushed his trolley forward because there was nothing else to do. His hand found his wand pocket. It was there. The willow wand, still slightly warmer than everything else, still carrying that faint sense of settled presence. He wrapped his fingers around the package. He hadn't unwrapped it yet. Not fully. And felt his breathing even out in the way it had been doing since the shop. He didn't understand this. He didn't try to. He found an empty compartment, 3 carriages from the front. He got his trunk onto the rack with the determined inelegance of someone who has never done it before and isn't going to ask for help, settled Hedwig's cage beside him, and sat down to watch the platform fill up through the window. He had been sitting like that for perhaps 10 minutes when the compartment door opened and a boy leaned in, tall and lanky, with red hair that looked like it had been standing up all morning, and a smear of something on his nose that Harry decided not to mention. "Anyone sitting here?" the boy asked, already scanning the rest of the compartment with the casual authority of someone who has done this before, or at least heard about doing it 5 times over. "Everywhere else is full, or my brothers are there." "No," Harry said. "It's just me." The boy came in. He dropped into the seat across from Harry with the comfortable thump of someone who belongs on trains and everywhere else by long practice and heredity. He looked at Harry's owl. He looked at Harry. He said, "I'm Ron. Ron Weasley." "Harry Potter." Ron's expression shifted briefly, a flicker of something that might have been recognition if it had been larger, and then settled back into its ordinary register. He nodded, as though this were information he was filing away rather than being surprised by. "Right," he said. "I'd heard you'd be starting." "What everyone knows?" Harry said, with a feeling he was beginning to recognize as the specific discomfort of fame in a world he'd only been part of for a month. "Sort of. My mum, she said when she spotted you on the platform buying your ticket." Ron looked briefly thoughtful. She might have mentioned it a few times. Harry decided this was fine. "You've got brothers here?" "5 older ones, yeah. Well, they're all in different years, and they've all found their own lot to sit with." He said it without resentment, which suggested this was simply the architecture of being a youngest son in a large family. You were on your own on the train. Bill and Charlie have already graduated, Ron added, as though being accurate mattered. So it's really just 3 brothers here now. Percy and the twins, Fred and George. You'll know Fred and George when you meet them, because they'll probably do something to you. Something friendly, Ron said, apparently meaning it. Just something. They can't help it. The train lurched into motion. The platform slid away through the window, families receding into the distance, the station swallowed by the tunnel and then replaced by grey-green London outskirts. Harry watched it go, and felt, as the last traces of his known world disappeared, a distinct and difficult-to-name sensation that was half grief and half relief, and mostly just the understanding that there was no going back to the summer. He was going somewhere. For the first time in his life, that sentence had an end to it that wasn't just the Dursleys' house. Your first year too, yeah? Ron said, already pulling open a paper bag of something. Mum packed about 40 sandwiches. I think she doesn't trust the trolley. She packed sandwiches because she loves you, Harry said, and then felt immediately like it was a strange thing to have said. But Ron just grinned, untroubled. Yeah, probably. He held out the bag. Want one? Corned beef. She always forgets I hate corned beef. Harry took a sandwich. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the particular easy silence of 2 people who have already, within 20 minutes, decided they are going to be friends without saying so, because 11-year-old boys do not say so. Ron described Hogwarts in the approximate, confidently wrong detail of someone who has absorbed the stories of 5 older siblings and filtered them through his own personality. The moving staircases, the ghosts, the professor who was a squib and had a thing about being pure blood, the first-year exam about something or other that wasn't actually that bad. Harry listened and thought that Ron talked the way some houses are warm, not deliberately, just structurally, because that's how they were built. He had taken the willow wand from his pocket at some point. He wasn't sure exactly when, only that it was out, lying along his thigh, the pale wood faintly luminous in the grey light from the window. He held it loosely. Ron noticed. He stopped mid-sentence. That's unusual, he said. He wasn't being rude about it. His voice had the tone of someone making an observation they couldn't quite contain. What wood is that? It's pale. Most wands you see are darker than that. Ash or oak? Willow, Harry said. Willow. Ron said it like he was turning it over. I don't think I've ever seen a willow wand. Dad would know about it. He's interested in that sort of thing. Wand lore. He paused. Most people who want to be auras or combat trained, my brothers were saying, they usually look for something denser. Oak or hawthorn, willows. He trailed off, apparently aware he was heading somewhere potentially rude. Uncommon, Harry said. I know, Ollivander told me. Ron waited, in the easy, undemanding way that was apparently just how he was. Harry looked at his wand for a moment. He thought about the holly wand going back into its box. He thought about Ollivander in the back of the shop with the sound of careful work. It was my mother's wood, he said. She had a willow wand. I asked Ollivander to make me something like hers. The compartment went quiet in a different way than before. Ron did not say anything immediately. He was looking at Harry with an expression that had gone careful, and still in the way of someone who has just understood they've stepped into something that mattered more than they knew, and who has enough sense not to keep walking. He didn't push. He didn't say he was sorry, which Harry was grateful for, because he had been getting sorries from people for a month, and none of them had known what they were sorry about. Yeah, Ron said at last. That makes sense, that. It was not eloquent. It was exactly right. The compartment door opened. The girl who looked in was bushy-haired and bright-eyed, and clearly in the middle of a project. She was also leading, or attempting to lead, a round-faced boy who looked like someone had recently told him very bad news, and he was still processing. "Have you seen a toad?" the girl said. "This boy has lost his toad. We've been through 4 carriages." "No toad," Ron said. "Sorry." The girl's gaze had already moved to Harry's wand, lying across his thigh. She paused. The round-faced boy behind her swayed slightly with the train's motion, too worried about his toad to notice Harry at all. "That's a willow wand," the girl said. She said it the way she might have said, "That's a first edition." Not rudely, but with the specific excitement of someone encountering a referenced item in its natural habitat. "I read about willow wands in Ollivander's collected notes. There's a chapter in a guide to advanced wand theory, and a summary in the Standard Book of Spells, Year 7, though I borrowed that from the library in Charing Cross before term, because I wanted to be prepared. Willow wands are quite uncommon. They have strong healing properties, and a particular affinity for advanced non-verbal applications. They tend to select—" She seemed to remember she was talking to someone she'd never met. "Sorry, I'm Hermione Granger. This is Neville Longbottom." "Harry Potter," Harry said, "and Ron Weasley." "Yes, I know," Hermione said, which Harry was beginning to understand was just going to be a thing. "Have you really not seen a toad? Brown, about this big?" "No toad," Ron repeated. Hermione nodded, turned, and continued down the corridor with the focused efficiency of someone who had allocated 12 minutes to this task and wasn't going to exceed it. Neville trailed after her. As he passed the compartment door, he gave Harry and Ron an apologetic look that communicated a great deal about what the last 4 carriages had been like. The door slid shut. Harry and Ron looked at each other. "Advanced non-verbal applications," Ron said. "She read the 7th year textbook," Harry said. "Before term." "She mentioned that," Ron agreed. They were both quiet for a moment. "She seemed all right, though." "Yeah," Harry said. He looked back at his wand. He thought about what Hermione Granger had said, not the specific words, which he would have to find a library to make sense of, but the fact of it, that there were books about willow wands, that the properties were documented, that what he had chosen, in a moment of impulsive reaching towards something he'd never held, had a history and a literature and rules that someone, somewhere, had thought worth writing down. His mother had used this wood. He turned toward the window. The countryside outside had gone properly green and wild, far from London now, into the rolling hills of somewhere Harry had never been, which was almost everywhere. Ron told him about Quidditch, unprompted, with the energy of a person who has been waiting all summer to talk to someone who didn't already know everything about it. Harry listened. The train rocked steadily beneath them, and the afternoon light shifted, and at some point Ron produced 2 more sandwiches, and they ate those as well. By the time the light began to go gold and then purple outside the windows, Harry had been told about the difference between a chaser and a seeker, the general layout of the Hogwarts grounds, the fact that the dungeons were cold even in September, and what it felt like to fly a broom for the first time, which Ron had done at age 6, and described in a way that made Harry simultaneously terrified and desperate to try it. In return, Harry had told Ron almost nothing about himself, because there was almost nothing to tell. 11 years in a cupboard, and 1 month of being a wizard is not much of a story. And Ron had not pressed, which Harry thought said something good about him. The train began to slow. Other students moved in the corridor, pulling on robes, checking bags. Harry changed into his school robes in the cramped compartment space, and did up the buttons wrong twice before getting them right, and when he looked up, Ron was already done, and was watching him with an expression that was carefully not amused. "The buttons," Ron started. "I know," Harry said. They emerged into the thinning crowd of the corridor and out onto a platform in the dark and the cool autumn air of somewhere Harry had never been, and there was a man at the far end of the platform calling for first years in a booming voice, and Harry followed the sound toward a smell of water and cold air and something wilder than London, and then they were at the edge of a lake. The castle was across the water. He had not been ready for this. He had been ready, or had thought he was ready, for a school, a building, something institutional and explicable. What rose out of the darkness across the black lake was none of those things. It was towers and windows, and hundreds of lights reflected in water so still it looked solid, and the mountains behind it, and the stars above it, and the boats waiting at the edge of the lake, and Harry stood at the edge of the bank and felt something very large and very old close around him like a hand. He stepped into a boat. Ron stepped in beside him. Other first years filed in around them, and the boats moved without visible propulsion, and Harry kept his hand on the willow wand in his pocket. Not because he was afraid, or not only because of that, because it was warm, because it settled something in him to hold it, the sense that he had already made one decision in this world that was his, one choice that belonged to nobody else, that pointed somewhere and meant something even if he couldn't yet say what. The castle grew larger as the boats drew closer, its reflection on the water breaking around the bow, and Harry thought of a name he was still learning to hold without flinching, and gripped the wand in his pocket and went toward the lights. The entrance hall was larger than any room Harry had ever stood in, and colder, and the ghosts were not helping. There were 4 of them drifting through the first-year cluster, with the genial proprietorial interest of people at a party they did not need to be invited to. One was pearly white and headless, which Harry tried not to stare at. Another was a plump little monk who kept floating through the edge of the group and then doubling back as though he'd forgotten something. The first years parted around them with the uneasy politeness of children who have been told to be polite to ghosts, and aren't sure what that requires in practice. Neville Longbottom was standing near Harry. He had been standing near Harry since the boats, in the quiet way of someone who has picked a landmark and is navigating by it. His toad, Trevor, Harry had gathered, was currently missing again, for the 3rd time since King's Cross. Neville was searching his pockets with one hand, and looking at the ghosts with his other hand, clenched at his side, and Harry recognized the expression on his face with a clarity that surprised him. It was the expression of someone who was used to things going wrong and had developed a baseline tolerance for it. Round-faced, plump, forgetful. Harry had met him for about 45 minutes, and already had the sense that Neville carried himself like an apology for something he hadn't done. Harry understood that. He didn't say so. He just stood near enough that if Neville wanted to say something, he could. "He was in my other pocket," Neville murmured. Not quite to Harry, but not to Harry. He extracted Trevor from a pocket that seemed too small for him, and held him with the wary relief of someone who suspects this is temporary. "Good," Harry said. "For now," Neville agreed. Then Professor McGonagall was there, a tall woman in emerald green robes with dark hair pinned severely back, and a face that suggested she had spent 55 years practicing patience and could call on the results of that practice immediately if required. She had the quality of a rule made physical. When she spoke, it was without raising her voice, which somehow made everyone in the entrance hall hear her perfectly. She told them about the 4 houses. She told them about the sorting. She did not tell them how the sorting would happen, which Harry found both consistent with how the wizarding world seemed to operate, and deeply unhelpful. Then the great doors opened, and she led them into the great hall. Harry had thought he was ready for this. He was wrong. The great hall was not a school dining room in any sense he understood. It was a hall in the castle sense. High stone walls and long tables, and hundreds of candles floating above them, which should have been alarming, and was instead inexplicably beautiful. 4 long tables ran the length of the room, each crowded with students in robes, each house a different color in the candlelight. At the far end, a 5th table on a raised dais held the teachers, and above it all, the ceiling. He had heard about the ceiling on the train. Ron had mentioned it in passing, the way Ron mentioned most things, as obvious background fact. But it was not obvious. It was the sky. A dark, enormous sweep of night sky full of stars, cloudless and deep, as real as looking up through an open roof, except that Harry could feel the warmth of the candles above him, and knew the stone was there, somewhere behind the illusion. He stared at it for longer than he should have, and then made himself look down. The sorting hat was on a stool at the front of the room. It was old and battered and patched in several places, and it was also, apparently, about to sing, which it did at some length about the qualities of each house in a voice that sounded like old leather and wisdom applied to the problem of rhyming. Harry listened with half his attention, and kept the other half on the teacher's table, where he was quietly trying to identify faces. He found the one he was looking for almost immediately. Hagrid had described him in general terms: pale, dark-haired, with a quality to his face that made people uncomfortable. He was sitting near the middle of the staff table, not speaking to the colleagues on either side of him, watching the first years with his arms folded. Black eyes, sallow skin, hooked nose. He looked like someone who had learned to make stillness into a weapon and had been using it for a long time. Even across the length of the great hall, when the man's gaze found Harry's, Harry felt it. He looked away first. He wasn't sure why. He only knew that there was something in the look he couldn't read, something that wasn't quite what he'd expected, and that not being able to read it bothered him more than being stared at by a stranger probably should. The sorting began. Names were called alphabetically, and each student walked to the stool and sat and put on the hat and waited while it read them. Some took seconds. A few took longer. Most sat with the specific, rigid composure of people trying not to look frightened in front of hundreds of witnesses. Neville Longbottom was called early, as he would be, and he walked up slowly, carrying Trevor with the resigned look of someone who had made peace with the situation, but was not happy about it. He sat on the stool and put on the hat, and it fell down over his eyes. He was motionless for a long moment. Then the hat said, Gryffindor, and Neville got up with visible relief, remembered Trevor, reclaimed Trevor from where he had apparently escaped to during the hat's deliberation, and made his way to the Gryffindor table to moderate applause. Harry watched him and thought, same house, then. And then thought, same house as my mother, probably, if she was brilliant and brave and not obviously Slytherin or Hufflepuff. He realized he didn't know which house she'd been in. He had not thought to ask. He added it to the growing list of things he didn't know about her and didn't have anyone to ask about. Potter! Harry! Every head in the great hall turned at once. Harry had thought he was prepared for this too. The fame had been building all day. The whispers on platform 934, the way people looked at him on the train, the recognition that followed his name like a second shadow. But the way 4 tables of students turned to look at him at once was something else. It was like being the last person to arrive at something that has been going on for years and everyone already knows your part. He walked to the stool. He sat down. He put on the sorting hat. It was dark inside. Then it was not quite dark, in the way of darkness that has thoughts in it. Said a voice that was in his head rather than in his ears, in the tone of someone settling into an interesting problem. Harry Potter. Yes, I've been expecting you. Let me see what we have here. It went quiet in the particular way of a mind reading another mind. Harry sat in the dark and felt himself being read and tried not to resist it, which was difficult, because being read required being open, and being open was not something he had any practice in. I see grief, the hat said, conversationally. A great deal of it, and very old for someone your age. I see reaching. You have been reaching toward something for a long time without knowing what it is. The wand choice is interesting. The hat paused. Very interesting. Most children your age want the wand that chose them. You wanted the wand that would tell you something. That is a particular kind of courage, or loneliness. Sometimes they look alike. Harry sat with that. You have intelligence, the hat went on. You have loyalty. You have something that might be ambition, though you don't call it that. You call it determination, which is the same thing wearing different clothes. And courage. Courage enough to have done something today that most 11-year-olds could not have done, which is to choose something real over something easy. Which house? Harry thought. Not loudly, just as a thought. You would do well in several, said the hat, which sounded sincere rather than diplomatic. But I think, yes, I think we know where you belong. It is where they all went, the ones who reached for things they were told they couldn't have. Better be Gryffindor, the last word it shouted aloud, and the Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took the hat off, stood, walked to the Gryffindor table, and sat down next to Neville, who was still holding Trevor with both hands, and the noise around him was so large and warm and immediate that he forgot, briefly, to feel anything complicated about any of it. He looked at the staff table. The man with the black eyes was looking at him. Just for a moment, and then his gaze dropped. Dropped specifically, not drifted, to the wand Harry had set on the table beside his plate while he sorted himself out. Pale willow wood. Something happened in the man's face. It was very small and very fast, a tightening around the eyes that wasn't quite a flinch and wasn't quite a wince, and was gone in less than a second. He looked away. He said something to the colleague beside him that appeared to be entirely about something else, or perhaps nothing at all, and folded his arms again. Harry looked at the wand on the table, and then back at the man, and then decided this was too much to think about on an empty stomach, when he didn't even know the man's name, yet. The feast appeared. This was, Harry thought later, possibly the best thing that had happened all day, which was a high bar given that the day had included discovering magic was real. The table went from empty to impossibly full in the same instant, platters of roast chicken and potatoes and vegetables and bread and sauces, and things Harry had never had access to in sufficient quantity, all of it available, and nobody telling him to take less. Ron sat down on his other side, having been sorted into Gryffindor with approximately 0 drama, the hat having apparently made up its mind while it was still settling on Ron's head. He leaned over and said, "Pass the chicken?" with the ease of someone who had done this many times at a different table, and Harry passed it and ate. It was enormous. It was warm. It was crowded in the way that felt like welcome rather than intrusion, and nobody was watching him specifically anymore because there was food, and food made everyone's priorities straightforward. The willow wand sat on the table beside his plate. After a while he picked it up and put it back in his pocket, where it was warmer. He looked up once, toward the end of the feast, when the noise had settled into the comfortable buzz of hundreds of people being full. The enchanted ceiling above him still showed the night sky, the same stars, or close enough, that hung above everything the world over, the same stars that had been there when the hall was empty, and would be there when it was empty again. Somewhere under a sky like that, Harry thought. Under this sky, or one like it, in a September long enough ago that he hadn't existed yet, a girl with red hair had sat in a hall like this one, in a school that had felt like the first place she'd ever been allowed to be exactly what she was. She had been Muggle-born and brilliant and precise with a willow wand, and she had learned charms here, and potions, and she had built a life that was eventually going to become his life. And she was the reason he was here. He looked at the stars for a long time. Across the great hall at the staff table, Professor Snape did not look at Harry Potter again for the remainder of the feast. He did not need to. The image was already placed, already filed somewhere that he would not allow himself to open. A pale willow wand on a table, held by hands he had not yet decided what to do with, belonging to a boy he had not yet decided what to feel about, in a hall that now contained something it had not contained for 10 years. He drank his water. He spoke to no one. He looked at the ceiling the way a man looks at something he cannot afford to see. The first week of Hogwarts taught Harry several things he hadn't expected. He hadn't expected the staircases to actually move, which seemed structurally irresponsible, and which he mentioned to Ron once, and didn't again, because Ron looked at him as though he'd expressed surprise that stairs were made of stone. He hadn't expected the portraits to have opinions, or that those opinions would be delivered freely in passing, or that a portrait of a medieval knight would spend most of Tuesday telling him he needed to improve his posture. He hadn't expected the homework to be so immediately and comprehensively enormous, and he hadn't expected the magic in his hands to feel the way it did. It was in Charms on Wednesday, with a small, cheerful Charms professor, whose name Harry did not catch over the noise of 17 students preparing to attempt the levitation charm for the first time. The instruction was straightforward: wrist motion, incantation, intent. Around him, students muttered to themselves, tried and failed and tried again. A girl 2 seats over managed a faint wobble. Ron got his feather to spin briefly before it stopped. Hermione Granger, who was sitting one table up and to the left, and had been Hermione Granger about this since Tuesday, got it on her second try with a precision that made the professor make a small appreciative sound. Harry raised his wand and said, "Wingardium Leviosa," and the feather rose. Not dramatically, not explosively, but smoothly and immediately, rising from the desk to the level of his eyes, and hanging there with a steadiness that suggested it had been waiting for the question. He lowered it. He raised it again. It obeyed with the same clean compliance. He put his wand down and looked at it. The willow wood was warm in the way it had been warm since Ollivander's, and he could feel, or thought he could feel, something at the edge of the warmth that wasn't quite eagerness, but was shaped like it. The wand liked this. This was the right kind of work for it, and it was saying so in the only language a wand had. He did not tell anyone. He was not sure it was his accomplishment to claim. He was still thinking about this on Thursday morning, on the stone corridor leading down to the dungeons, with Ron on one side walking too fast because he was nervous, and Hermione on the other side walking at exactly the right pace because she had already reviewed all the relevant material and was prepared. "Slughorn's notes are in the library," Hermione said, without particular preamble. The old ones, from when he was teaching. He wrote about his exceptional students. Not all of them, just the ones he wanted to remember. "Your mother is in there." She said it carefully, in the way of someone who has decided that careful is the correct register for this particular piece of information. Lily Potter. He wrote that she had, specifically, an exceptional talent for both potions and charms, and that he'd rarely seen them so well combined in a single student. Most people, apparently, are stronger in one or the other. Harry said nothing. He was counting the steps to the dungeon door. "I thought you might want to know," Hermione added. "I did," he said. "Thank you." He was holding his wand in his robe pocket with 2 fingers. He relaxed them deliberately when he noticed, because gripping it too tightly felt like admitting something he wasn't ready to name. The potions classroom was underground, as the dungeons generally were, and it had the quality of a room that had never been warm, not even in the memory of its walls. The shelves along the sides held jars of preserved things, floating in various states of suspension, their labels written in a cramped hand, and the tables were stained with years of prior years' work. Harry found a seat beside Ron and set up his equipment, and put his wand beside his cauldron on the desk, and waited. Snape came in without preliminary. This was the thing Harry would later understand was characteristic. No ceremony, no announcement, no pause at the door. He was simply there, standing at the front of the room, which fell silent, not because anyone called for it, but because the silence was already in the room, and his presence organized it. He was dressed in black robes that hung still even when he moved, and his voice, when he spoke, was low and exactly calibrated to make you work slightly to hear it. "You are here," he said, "because someone decided that potions is a subject worth your time. I disagree with many things. I do not disagree with that." A pause in which several students forgot to breathe. "What I do disagree with is the assumption that it is easy. It is not. It rewards precision. It rewards patience. It rewards those who understand that the difference between a cure and a poison is not intent but execution." His black eyes moved across the room and stopped on Harry for a moment that lasted slightly longer than it needed to. "Mr. Potter." Harry looked up. "Tell me," Snape said, in the tone of someone proposing a wager they intend to win, "what I would get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood." Harry did not know. He said so. "Bezoar," Snape continued without inflection, as though Harry's answer was neither surprising nor particularly interesting. "Tell me where I would find one." "I don't know." "The difference between a monkshood plant and a wolfsbane plant." "I don't know," he added, because this seemed accurate. "Are they the same thing?" This answer produced from Snape the specific expression of a man who has just confirmed a low opinion held since Tuesday. "Sit down, Mr. Potter." He had not asked Harry to stand. Harry stayed seated and tried not to look as though his face was hot, which it was. "Miss Granger," Snape said, and his voice shifted into something that was still cold but was calibrated slightly differently, the temperature of a man who has decided to teach something rather than demonstrate something. "Wolfsbane." "Also known as monkshood or aconite," Hermione said promptly. "Same plant. The same preparation can be used as a potion component in various applications, including the wolfsbane potion, which mitigates certain lycanthropic symptoms." She said this with the composure of someone who has read 4 separate sources and is ready to cite all of them. Snape looked at her for a moment. "Precisely." He turned back toward the board. "The potion student who is worth training is the one who understands that this discipline is inseparable from its neighbors. A poor charm student cannot brew the more advanced preparations, because the wand work in a charm and the technique in a brewing sequence share an underlying grammar." He paused at the board, his back to the room. The two disciplines were never truly separable. A truly gifted potion student is almost always gifted at charms as well. He turned. His eyes moved to the desk where Harry was sitting, and they went to the wand, pale willow lying beside the cauldron, distinct from the darker woods around it. And they stopped there. 1 second. Less than 1 second. The kind of pause that, if you weren't watching for it, you would not see. He looked away. He returned to the lesson. Harry did not move. He understood that something had happened, even if he couldn't have said what it was or what it meant. There had been something in that single, unguarded moment, in the shift in Snape's face between finishing the sentence and looking at the wand, that didn't match the rest of the man's expression. Not warmth, not recognition exactly. Something that sat behind recognition. Something older. He filed it under things he would think about when he had more information. The potion was a simple preparation, a boil cure, instructions provided, work through it, no deviation. Harry followed the steps carefully and ended up with a result that would, the professor noted while passing his desk without stopping, not embarrass the field. He took this as a compliment. He was not sure it was intended as one. Hermione's was correct to the letter. She sat back when she finished with the expression of someone checking items off a list. Ron's was slightly too bright in colour, which he said was probably fine, and Hermione said was probably not. Walking out of the dungeon into the cold corridor, Hermione said, measured and precise, "Willow wands tend to bring out their owner's charms affinity most strongly. I read that in Ollivander's collected notes. It would mean potions, which relies much less on wand work. Might not be your wand's strongest area. That isn't the same as saying you can't improve at it," she added quickly. "It just means the natural lean isn't there." "My mother was brilliant at both," Harry said. "Yes." Hermione considered this. "Maybe she worked harder at potions, or maybe it's not just the wand. The notes said tend to, not only or exclusively." Harry nodded. He didn't know what his mother had worked hard at, or whether she had found any of it easy, or whether she had ever sat at a dungeon desk and watched a professor look at her wand with something complicated in his face and not known what it meant. He didn't know enough about her to know anything, and the not knowing had a weight to it that was accumulating, day by day, in the space behind his sternum, where things went when he couldn't carry them in his hands. He knew she had been good at this. He knew she had stood somewhere in this school, with a willow wand, and worked at the things she was good at. He knew Slughorn had remembered her and written it down. He knew the wand in his pocket leaned toward the kind of magic she had excelled at. That was something. It was not enough. But it was something, and he held it carefully, the way you hold the first piece of something you haven't yet been given the rest of. The flying lesson had been that morning, before potions, an hour on the grounds in the grey September air, brooms in a row and the flying instructor walking the line. Harry's broom had jumped to his hand before the instructor finished the instruction, which had earned him a look of mild surprise from the instructor and a look of not surprise from Ron, who had apparently decided Harry was simply like this. He'd taken to the air and it had been, embarrassingly, natural. Like finding a motion his body already knew, like remembering rather than learning. He'd moved the broom through the practice course with the ease of something hereditary, which it was, probably, according to everyone who had told him his father had been a chaser. He didn't think about his father much in the air. He just flew. And the willow wand in his pocket had grown warm, not hot, not alarming. The same steady warmth it carried, but slightly more present, as though the altitude had pleased it. No burst of light or crackling energy. Just warmth, the way a cat will warm your lap without meaning to make a statement about it. He'd noticed and said nothing, and flown. Later, walking to the castle, he had looked up at one of the upper windows and thought, without being certain, because the figure was only a silhouette, that someone was watching. Still, dark-robed, standing back from the glass in a way that suggested deliberate distance. He couldn't be sure. The window was far enough above that it might have been anyone. He put it aside and went in for dinner, and did not think about it again until he was lying awake in the Gryffindor dormitory, listening to Ron breathe in the next bed. And by then he had too many other things to think about, for one more to make much difference. Professor McGonagall caught Harry before he reached the castle doors. She had been moving with the controlled urgency of a woman who has decided something and intends to implement it before anyone can argue, and she appeared at Harry's elbow in the way that she seemed to appear at things, as though she had simply always been there. She said without preamble, "Potter," a word. The other students from the flying lesson streamed past them toward the warmth of the entrance hall, and Harry stood on the grass with the September wind at his back and looked at her. "You can fly," she said. It was not a question. She said it the way a person identifies a fact that has consequences. "I think so," Harry said. "You can fly," she repeated, with the air of someone who does not have time for false modesty and will not be issuing an invitation for it. "I have arranged a Nimbus 2000. It will be delivered to your dormitory by this evening." She paused, as though making an internal accounting. "You will be playing Seeker for Gryffindor this year." "Do you know what a Seeker does?" Harry considered what he had learned from Ron on the train. "More or less," he said, which was somewhat less than accurate. She looked at him with the expression of someone who is choosing to accept this and move forward. "You will be brought up to speed. Do not tell your classmates about the Nimbus before this evening. I prefer not to create a circus. Do you understand?" "Yes," Harry said. She nodded once, a precisely calibrated nod, and walked away toward the castle with the air of someone who has crossed one item off a list and is proceeding to the next. Harry stood on the grass for a moment in the September wind and thought about a broomstick arriving in his dormitory and the improbability of his life, and then went inside to find Ron. He found Ron in the common room. He told him what had happened. Ron's face went through several phases in rapid succession. Surprise, confirmation that yes, this made complete sense, excitement that built from a baseline to something barely containable, and then he launched into an explanation of the Seeker position that covered its history, its strategic function, its famous practitioners, and what Harry would need to know about the golden snitch in approximately 4 minutes flat, almost entirely without pausing for breath. Harry sat on the arm of a chair and listened, and felt, slowly and with some surprise, that the thing Ron was describing was something he wanted to do. Not for the fame, not for the winning, but because the morning had given him 45 minutes in the air, and in those 45 minutes he had felt something he had no name for. A rightness in the movement, a sense of his body working the way it was supposed to work, a relief. As though gravity had been an imposition all along, and the broom was the correction. "The snitch is gold," Ron was saying, "and very small, about the size of a walnut. And your only job is to find it before the other team's Seeker, and once you have it, the game ends. And if you catch it, you get—" "I know about the snitch," Harry said. "You told me on the train." "Right." Ron didn't look embarrassed about this at all. "Well, the Nimbus 2000 is a good broom. A very good broom. You're going to be brilliant." He said this with the cheerful certainty of someone who has decided it is true and sees no reason to hedge. The nimbus arrived that evening, as promised, wrapped in brown paper and longer than Harry's bed. Ron made him unwrap it on the floor so they could both look at it properly. It was sleek and dark-handled, and had a quality about it that suggested it was waiting to be fast, the way some animals wait. Harry ran his hand along the handle and felt nothing mystical. It was a broom, a very good broom, a tool, and then he put it under his bed and went to sleep and dreamed, briefly, of air. The first proper practice was a Saturday dawn. Oliver Wood, the Gryffindor captain, 16, and built with the compact intensity of someone who had organized his entire personality around a sport, had cornered Harry at breakfast on Thursday and delivered a speech about commitment, preparation, and what exactly he expected from a seeker. And Harry had said, "All right," at the appropriate intervals, and assumed this would become clearer when it happened. It became clearer on the pitch in the grey pre-dawn while the rest of the castle was asleep. The other Gryffindor players were mostly 5th and 6th years, and they looked at Harry the way people look at something they don't yet trust, but have been told to accommodate. Harry didn't mind. He had spent most of his first 11 years not being trusted, and had developed a particular equanimity about it. He mounted the nimbus, kicked off, and rose into the cold morning air, and almost immediately felt the skepticism behind him become a different kind of attention, the kind that adjusts when it receives new information. He didn't show off. He didn't try to. He just flew the drills Wood called out, and the nimbus responded to him like an extension of his own intention. And after about 20 minutes, Wood said, "Right, that'll do," in a voice that suggested he had already known this would work, but found the confirmation satisfying. They ran through patterns, positions, the complex choreography of a seeker's job in a real match, watching, anticipating, moving in 3 dimensions, while 6 other players moved around him. Harry absorbed the geometry of it intuitively, and was not particularly surprised by this, because flying, he was beginning to understand, was not a thing he was learning. It was a thing he was remembering. He landed after one of the drills to let Wood reconfigure the practice pattern, and found Neville Longbottom sitting in the lowest row of the stands, with his hands in his pockets, and Trevor the Toad sitting on his knee. "I didn't know you were coming," Harry said, walking over. He wasn't complaining. It was just a statement of the situation. "I like watching," Neville said, with the mild certainty of someone who has noticed something true about himself. "I'm not going to play. My broom wouldn't. It wasn't good." He didn't say it as self-pity, the way Harry might have expected. He said it as fact, the way you'd report weather. "But watching is fine." Harry sat on the edge of the stands near him and unclipped his wand pocket, a habit he was developing, checking it when he landed, the same way you check your pockets after a crowd, and noticed, in the way you notice things when you're sitting next to someone and not trying, that Neville's wand was out. He was turning it over in his hands, in the idle way of someone who is thinking about something else. It was darker than Harry's, much darker, a dense, heavy-looking wood that Harry didn't know the name of, too large for Neville's hand, or rather, just slightly wrong in some unnameable way. Neville held it comfortably enough, from long practice, but there was no particular ease in it. It was an accommodation, a managed situation. Harry knew better than to say anything. He had met Neville 11 days ago, and the thing he knew most clearly about Neville Longbottom was that he was a person who had already been told, in various ways, various things that hadn't helped him. He didn't need one more person telling him his wand situation was unfortunate. He said nothing, and looked at the pitch. Wood was setting up the next drill. Harry went back out. He was midway through a spiral descent, the kind of controlled drop a seeker uses to cut off a snitch from below, when the drill went wrong. Not catastrophically. He pulled up sharply to avoid a collision with a beater who'd moved into his line. The broom protested the sudden direction change, and he came down faster than intended and got his landing wrong. He hit the grass with his left palm, taking most of the impact, and felt a sharp, bright sting run from his hand to his wrist. He sat up. His palm was scraped, skin torn, bleeding a little, gritty with grass and fine soil. Not serious. He'd had worse from the Dursleys' garden work. He reached for his wand with his right hand, using it to push himself upright from the ground. The bleeding slowed. He looked at his hand. It hadn't stopped entirely. There was still a red line across his palm where the skin had been torn. But the bleeding had slowed faster than it should have, and the edges of the scrape looked slightly less raw than they had a moment ago. He could feel the wand in his grip. Warm, steady, the small, sustained warmth that was its constant note. But something about that warmth was different in the same way that a room is different when someone in it is quietly paying attention. He held very still and stared at his palm. "Did you mean to do that?" said Neville, at his elbow. Harry looked up. Neville had come down from the stands and was standing a few feet away with the specific focused attention of someone who has seen something and wants to understand it. "No," Harry said. "Your wand did something," Neville said. Not an accusation, just an observation, the way he said most things. Harry looked at the wand in his hand. Pale willow, warm, entirely innocent looking. "I just grabbed it to get up," he said. Neville nodded, as though this made sense to him. He sat down on the grass nearby, not crowding Harry, just close enough to talk without raising his voice. "My grandmother has a book about wand woods," he said. "She has a lot of books about wand woods, actually. She's very serious about it. I read the section on willow once." He paused, in the manner of someone being careful about how they say something. "It said willow wands sometimes do things on their own. Not often in first years. But it said they have. It used the phrase, an attentive relationship with the body, that they notice injury and respond to it without being asked to." Harry looked at his palm again. The raw edges were definitely calmer now. He pressed the wand gently against the scrape, not casting anything, just contact, and felt a wave of warmth that moved up from the cut in a direction contrary to gravity, the way warmth from a coal fire moves differently from warmth from a furnace. "Nice wand for charm work," he said, mostly to himself. "What?" "Something the wand maker said." He looked at the wand. "About my mother's wand. She had a willow one. He said it was nice for charm work." He paused. "I think it does things I haven't learned to do yet." Neville considered this with the gravity of an 11-year-old in possession of second-hand scholarship. "That's good," he said finally. "Probably." "Yeah," Harry agreed. "Probably." He looked at Neville's wand, still in Neville's pocket, but visible at the grip. He didn't say anything about it, but the contrast was in his mind. The pale willow, warm and alert in his hand, doing things he hadn't asked for. The heavy, dark wood in Neville's pocket, carried every day by someone it hadn't chosen, managed with careful perseverance, and never quite right. Neville said, after a moment, "Can I see yours?" "Just look. I won't touch." Harry held it out. Neville looked at it without moving closer, studying the pale wood and the grain with an expression that was curious rather than envious. "It feels right when you hold it," Neville said. Not a question. "Yes," Harry said. "Mine doesn't," Neville said, with the same factual equanimity he used for everything. "It never has. My Gran says I just need to practice more." He paused. "I think she might be wrong about that." Harry didn't say anything for a moment. He turned the wand over once in his fingers, feeling its warmth, thinking about Ollivander retreating to his workbench, about the difference between a wand retrieving itself from a shelf and a wand being made, about the warm trembling that had been the Willow's version of choosing. "I almost left with a different one," he said. "The one that chose me first. It would have been easier." "Why didn't you?" "I wanted something that was—" He stopped. He wasn't sure, still, exactly what he had wanted. Something real. Something that pointed backward and also forward. Something that wasn't just the right thing, but the right thing for the right reasons. "Something that was mine," he said, which wasn't quite it, but was close enough. Neville thought about this with visible care. Then he said, "Wands probably don't care about deserving. They just care about matching." Harry looked at him. "I read that too," Neville said mildly. "In the same book." Wood called for Harry from across the pitch. Harry stood up, tucked his wand away, and took the nimbus from the grass. His palm was still pink where the scrape had been, but the bleeding was gone entirely, and when he mounted the broom and pushed off into the grey October air, it was with a feeling he was beginning to be familiar with, the sense of moving toward something he hadn't yet had the full measure of, through a sky that held more than he could currently see. Below him, Neville watched for a while longer, and then went back to the castle. Halloween arrived at Hogwarts the way it arrived everywhere, abruptly, with decoration, except that at Hogwarts the decorations included 1,000 live bats and jack-o'-lanterns the size of small carriages, which were carved not with the simple triangles of Privet Drive, but with expressions of genuine menace, illuminated from inside by conjured fire that cast long orange shadows across the vaulted ceiling of the Great Hall. Harry had been at Hogwarts for 2 months by the time Halloween came. He had learned to navigate the moving staircases, had developed a working relationship with his wand that felt less like using a tool and more like thinking in a particular direction, and had sat through enough of Snape's potions lessons to understand that being looked at coldly and being noticed were 2 different things, and that Snape was doing both, though Harry still couldn't have said why. He was eating candied pumpkin at the Halloween feast, and half listening to Ron describe the finer points of a chess strategy that had apparently occurred to him while asleep when the doors at the far end of the Great Hall flew open. The Data Professor lurched through them. Harry knew him by now, a slight, nervous man with a stammer and a permanent quality of apology, who wore his turban to every class and seemed to flinch at his own subject matter. He had never looked particularly well. He looked considerably worse now. His face was chalk white, and he was moving like someone being operated from a distance. "Troll," he managed, in the direction of the staff table. "In the dungeons." He gripped the doorframe. "Thought you ought to know." And then he crumpled. The silence lasted approximately 1 second. Then the Great Hall became very loud. Dumbledore's voice cut through the noise with the effortless authority of someone who has been managing catastrophes for 110 years and has developed some perspective on them. He sent the prefects to lead their houses to their dormitories. He sent the teachers to search the corridors. The message was clear. Move now. Panic later. And do it in an orderly fashion. The students moved. Harry moved with them, in the current of Gryffindors heading for the stairs, and was almost to the door when he stopped. Ron stopped because Harry stopped. Ron said, "What?" in the tone of someone who would quite like to be going upstairs. "Hermione," Harry said. Ron's expression did the thing it did when he had made an error he'd prefer not to examine. A brief, complicated tightening, followed by the recognition that examining it was in fact required. She wasn't at the feast," he said. "No," Harry said. The reason Hermione hadn't been at the feast was that Ron had said something careless in front of several people that afternoon. Harry had heard it. He hadn't been part of it, but he'd heard it, and he'd seen Hermione's face afterward. Not crying, not immediately, but with the expression of someone saving it for somewhere private. And he'd thought, she's going to the bathroom and she'll be fine. And then the feast had started, and everyone had gotten distracted by the food and the decorations and the general overwhelming sensory event of Halloween at Hogwarts, the girls' bathroom, on the ground floor, which was, as best Harry could remember, the map he'd been building in his head over the past 2 months, not far from the dungeons. Right, Ron said, already turning. They went against the current, upstream against the press of students heading upstairs, which was unpleasant and involved several elbows, and through a stone passage and down a shorter corridor, and stopped in front of a door that they had no business being in front of, from which, through the old stone, came a sound. Irregular. Wet. Heavy. Harry pushed open the door. The troll was enormous, the only word that was adequate, 12 feet of grey-green heft, and moving with the uncoordinated violence of something that hasn't learned to be careful in enclosed spaces. It had already demolished 2 of the sinks. Water was running freely across the stone floor from the shattered pipes. Hermione was backed into the far corner between a row of stalls and the wall, absolutely still, with the expression of someone who has read about trolls in every available source and is now receiving information those sources did not adequately convey. She was not screaming. Harry thought, in the half-second he had for thoughts, that this was actually consistent with what he knew about her, that her response to an extreme situation was to go very still and process it very fast. She was processing it. She had simply not yet arrived at an action. He didn't wait for her to get there. He ran at the troll, which was the second most impulsive thing he'd done since arriving at Hogwarts, the first being a conversation in a wand shop, and got up its back by the same principle he'd used to climb the oak tree in the Dursleys' garden to escape Dudley's gang, which was that if you're going to do something inadvisable, you might as well do it immediately before your brain catches up. He got his arm around the troll's neck, grabbed its ear to keep himself from sliding, and hung there while the troll made an enormous noise and began to swing around trying to find him. His wand was in his pocket. He could not get to it without letting go of the ear, and he was not prepared to let go of the ear. "Ron!" he shouted, from somewhere near the troll's left shoulder. Ron, who was standing in the doorway, with the specific expression of someone who has made a terrible miscalculation about the value of proximity, looked at the troll's fallen club on the wet floor, looked at Harry, looked back at the club, and picked it up with both hands. He threw it. He was not, by his own admission, much of a thrower. The club went sideways rather than at the troll, and crashed into the far wall. The troll swung toward the noise. Harry swung with it, stomach lurching, and got his wand hand free. "Wingardium Leviosa," he said. Not loudly. There was not much spare air when you were being swung around by a 12-foot troll, but with the intent behind it that he had learned in charms, the specific directed pressure of a spell that knew what it was supposed to do. The club rose. It rose the way the feather had risen in charms class. Smoothly, with no resistance, immediately. The willow wand was warm in his fingers, and something about the spell felt the same as that first charms lesson. Not effortful, not a struggle, but like asking in a language the wand already spoke. It rose to the level of the troll's head. Troll high. Harry's arm was shaking from the effort of hanging on. "Drop it," he said, and let the spell go. The club came down. The troll went down with it, slowly and completely, the way something very large and very surprised collapses, not dramatically, but with a finality, hitting the wet stone floor in pieces, first the knees, then the rest. The water spread around it in a circle. The room went quiet except for the running pipes and the sound of Harry landing badly on his feet after sliding down the troll's back as it fell. He stood in the shallow water, breathing. His hands were trembling. The wand was still warm in his fingers, but the warmth was different now, present and specific, the way warmth is in a hand after work. He looked at it, then at the troll, then at Hermione, who had not moved from the wall. She breathed out. Ron breathed out. Harry put his wand in his pocket. The professors arrived shortly after, McGonagall first, with Snape behind her, and the Data professor at the rear still looking pale and rattled. McGonagall was not pleased, which she communicated with an economy of expression that required no words. Harry and Ron began explaining, which was complicated, and the part of the explanation that was complicated was the reason Hermione had been in the bathroom at all, which involved Ron having to be honest about the unkind thing he'd said in front of several people that afternoon. Hermione, however, spoke first. "I went looking for the troll," she said, in a clear voice that only wavered slightly at the edges. "I'd read about them. I thought I could handle it. Harry and Ron came to find me." McGonagall's expression shifted through several things in quick succession and arrived at something complicated and unreadable. She took 5 points from Gryffindor. For rule-breaking, Harry assumed, though the fine points of the accounting were unclear, and told them to go to their dormitories immediately and not to be foolish again, in tones that suggested she found them somewhat less irritating than she was currently indicating. Snape said nothing throughout this exchange. He looked at Harry once, a brief assessment, not the extended stillness of the feast, and then at the troll on the floor, and then at Harry's pocket, where the willow wand's handle was just visible. His expression did not change. He turned and left. Later, much later, past midnight, the 3 of them sat in the Gryffindor common room by the dying fire. Ron had said sorry to Hermione. He had said it simply and directly, which was the right way to do it, and she had accepted it in the same register. Harry had not been involved in this exchange. It was between the 2 of them, and he'd sat at the other end of the hearthrug and examined his wand while it resolved. "You cast that charm perfectly," Hermione said, when the apology had been accepted and the subject changed. Harry shrugged. "I've done it before, in class. Under no pressure, with a feather. Not while hanging off a troll." She said it as a clarification, rather than a compliment, though it amounted to the same thing. Willow wands are documented as performing levitation charms with a particular consistency. I read about it last week when I was looking up your wand. She appeared briefly to realize this was a thing she had just admitted to. "I was curious," she added, not apologetically. "You looked up my wand," Harry said. "The properties of willow as a wand would," she said, with precision. "Not specifically yours. Ollivander's notes are in the library, 3 of them, the ones he donated. Willow wands perform charms at a higher consistency rate than most other woods. The affinity is documented." She paused. "It would explain why it felt easy." "It did feel easy," Harry said. "The wand didn't. It felt like it leaned into it, like it wanted to." "Yes," she said. "It would." She had already looked it up. She had read about it, formed a conclusion, and now she was confirming it with evidence in the form of a troll on a bathroom floor and a charm performed under pressure. This was, Harry was beginning to understand, simply how Hermione Granger operated. She read first, understood second, and only then made a claim. He looked at his wand in his hands. He thought about his mother casting this exact spell. Not the troll part. He hoped his mother's first year had not included trolls, but the spell itself. The specific light feeling of a levitation charm when the wand already knows how to do this. The warmth that was less like effort and more like agreement. Ron had fallen asleep in his chair. He was snoring faintly into a cushion, and his red hair was standing up in 3 directions. "He did all right," Harry said. "With the club." "He did," Hermione agreed. She sounded like she was filing this away in a different category than the one she'd previously assigned to Ron, which Harry thought was probably significant. The fire was very low now. Harry looked at it for a while. He thought about what it had been like in that bathroom when the spell had gone. The clean, immediate response of the wand, no lag, no resistance, the club rising the way the feather had risen. He thought about Ollivander retreating to his workbench to make something out of pale wood and an unnamed core, and the warm trembling with which it had accepted him. He thought about a girl in a Hogwarts uniform, standing somewhere in this castle 20 years ago, and learning this same spell for the first time. He didn't know what it had felt like for her. He would never know. But he knew what it had felt like for him. Natural, immediate, like a word said in the right language. And he thought, quietly, that maybe it had felt something like this. That the wand had been honest with him when it chose him. That the wood that had suited her would suit him. That whatever she had built with it, he could reach toward through the grain of the same pale willow. He went to bed holding it. He put it on the nightstand only when he was almost asleep, and even then he reached for it once in the dark, just to feel that it was there. The morning of the match, Harry ate approximately half a piece of toast. He was not, as a general matter, a nervous person. He had survived 11 years of Dudley Dursley and a summer of revelations that would have unhinged a less adaptable mind, and he had sat through Snape's potions lessons without audible complaint. But Quidditch, it turned out, was different. Quidditch had a crowd. Quidditch had several hundred people who had been told he was remarkable at this and would be watching to confirm it. Ron appeared to be nervous on his behalf, which was generous but not helpful. Ron had talked him through the match scenario 3 times at dinner the previous night, and was beginning a 4th pass at breakfast when Hermione sat down across from them, looked at Harry's plate, looked at Ron's animated expression, and said, "You're making it worse." Ron looked briefly offended. Then he looked at Harry, who had not picked up the toast since sitting down. He put his own toast down. "Right," he said. "Sorry. You'll be fine." "I know," Harry said. He wasn't sure he knew, but saying it aloud helped. He put his willow wand in the inside pocket of his Quidditch jacket before leaving the changing rooms. Not for any tactical reason. He couldn't cast spells from a moving broom at match speed, and the Seeker's job was to find a small golden ball, not to duel anyone. He put it in his pocket because the morning was cold and the air over the pitch would be colder, and he had learned, over the past few weeks, that the wand's quiet warmth was a specific reliable thing in uncertain situations. He didn't examine this too carefully. He just put it in his pocket. The Quidditch pitch was already loud when the players walked out. 2 teams, 2 sets of supporters, a commentary that Harry could hear but not quite make out from field level. He mounted the nimbus and felt immediately the same thing he always felt on a broom. The ground becoming optional. The weight of everything he'd been carrying since breakfast became slightly beside the point. He rose, and the match began. Oliver Wood had described the strategy with considerable thoroughness over the preceding weeks. Harry's job was simple in principle and difficult in execution. Find the snitch, catch it, end the match with Gryffindor ahead. Simple in principle because the goal was one thing. Difficult in execution because the snitch was very small, very fast, and had no fixed route. He circled high above the action, scanning. The match was fast and loud below him, chasers weaving through each other, a bludger going wide, the crowd swelling and subsiding around each goal attempt. Harry moved through it all at a different altitude, a different register, watching. He saw the snitch. It was there, just below the level of the goalposts at the far end, golden and hovering in the November air. He went into a dive. Then his broom moved. Not the controlled, intentional movement of direction change. Something else, a jerk, a wrong note, as though the broom had received an instruction that contradicted his own and was negotiating between the two. He tightened his grip on the handle and corrected, and the broom jerked again, more sharply. He lost sight of the snitch. He held on. The broom was not behaving like a broom. It was bucking in a way that had no relationship to the wind or his position, random and violent, the way a thing moves when something is acting on it from outside. The Nimbus 2000 was not a school broom. Nimbus 2000s did not spontaneously malfunction. He pulled the handle level, and the broom dipped sharply left, and he said something under his breath that he had learned from the summer garden and would not have used in front of Hagrid. He held on. He focused on keeping altitude. The crowd's noise had changed. No longer the general excitement of a match, but something more specific and anxious, directed at him. In the stands, Hermione Granger was not watching Harry. She was watching Professor Snape. She had noticed him a minute earlier, during the first bout of broom bucking, when the crowd around her had shifted to alarmed murmuring. She had a particular way of noticing things. She noticed them, and then immediately asked why, which most people in a crowd full of shouting don't do. What she noticed was that Snape was facing Harry, not watching the general play, as most of the staff were, but specifically and fixedly facing Harry, and that his lips were moving with the continuous, controlled movement of someone maintaining a sustained incantation. Not enthusiastic, not excitable. Deliberate in the way that Hermione had read, in a book she had found in the restricted section the previous week, was the pattern of a counter-jinx applied from a distance. She had also read about this particular scenario in the same book. The counter-jinx required unbroken attention. Break the attention, break the jinx. She reached into her bag for her wand. She had to get to Snape, without Snape noticing she was getting to Snape. She moved along the stands, in a crouch, using the crowd as cover, until she was close enough. She aimed at the hem of his robes. She murmured the incantation, the small, specific one that any first year who had read carefully enough would know. The robes caught, briefly, at the very edge. Snape flinched. His concentration broke. In the air above the pitch, Harry's broom steadied. What Professor Snape had been doing for the past 4 minutes was not jinxing Harry Potter's broom. He had been doing the opposite. The Dada professor, sitting 3 seats along the staff row, his face composed with the careful emptiness of someone maintaining a performance, had begun the jinx when Harry's broom first dipped, and Snape had been countering it from the moment he recognized the pattern, which had taken him approximately 6 seconds, because he had designed and applied similar spells during the First War, and knew their signature, the way a composer knows a melody someone is playing wrong in another room. He had not hesitated. He had simply begun the counterwork, sustained and methodical, because this was what he had promised. Not to Dumbledore directly, to the understanding he had reached with Dumbledore on a night 2 years ago, when he had come back from the other side of a line he could not uncross, and Dumbledore had looked at him for a long time without speaking, before asking what he wanted in exchange for information. Snape had said, "Protect the boy." Dumbledore had said, "That is a thing I had already intended." And Snape had said, "I know. I want to be the one doing it." He was not protecting Harry Potter, James Potter's son, the boy with James's hair and James's easy way in the air and the specific quality of James's casual talent, was not something he had undertaken to protect. That was beside the point. He was protecting Lily's son. The boy who had her eyes, who had said no to the wand that would have defined him as James's legacy, and had asked instead for something else, something paler and quieter, something that sat in a jacket pocket while the boy flew above the pitch. His eyes moved to the pocket. Just once. From across the pitch, in November air and cold grey light, he could see the handle. Pale willow, visible at the pocket's edge against the red of the Gryffindor jacket. He had seen that wood once before. He had seen it many times, over 7 years of standing in this same stadium, on the broom or in the stands or crossing the grounds. He had seen it in the hallway of Gryffindor Tower on a morning when he had no business being in Gryffindor Tower, before things went wrong in ways that could not be corrected. He had seen it in his memory, reliably, whenever he chose not to, and occasionally when he did. He returned his attention to the counter-jinx. The Gryffindor broom steadied, and a moment later, Snape's robes caught fire at the hem, and he put it out with a wordless spell before anyone nearby could do more than glance, and the counter-jinx was no longer necessary because the disturbance in the spell had broken the other professor's concentration. He folded his hands on his knees. He looked at nothing in particular. Harry, above the pitch, felt the broom go smooth and right under his hands. The snitch was there, below him and to the left, hovering at the edge of the keeper's goal. He went into a dive with the clean, controlled intent that he was beginning to understand was how he flew. Not aggressive, not flashy but precise. He thought of nothing except the direction and the speed and the small golden point of light he was converging on. He opened his hand at the last possible moment and closed it, and bit down on something small and metal and round that tasted like determination. He pulled up. The referee's whistle went. The crowd erupted. Gryffindor had won its first match. He could not hear himself think in the changing room afterward, and did not especially try. Oliver Wood was moving through the celebration with the expression of a man who has achieved something he's been working toward for a year and is allowing himself, just this once, to be happy about it. The other players, the chasers, the beaters, the keeper, had recalibrated their opinion of the 11-year-old seeker and were now expressing this recalibration loudly. Harry sat in the middle of it and ate a piece of the chocolate someone pressed into his hand and let it wash over him. Hagrid found them by the pitch afterward. He was enormous and jubilant, red-faced with cold and the effort of clapping, and he clapped Harry on the back with the force of someone who has forgotten their own dimensions. "Brilliant," he said. "Harry, that was brilliant. Your dad would have—" He stopped himself. He started again. "Your mum, too," he said, more carefully. She'd have been right proud. "Hagrid," Ron said, from where he'd landed in the grass after the clap on Harry's back had knocked him sideways. Someone said Snape was watching Harry really intently during the match, like staring at him the whole time. Hagrid's large face went through a complicated series of movements. "Well," he said. "Snape? He wouldn't do anything to Harry. You know that?" "He was staring," Ron said. That's just how he watches, Ron. Don't read anything into it." Harry filed the phrase quietly away. Wouldn't do anything to Harry. Not wasn't watching Harry. Not was looking at the game. Wouldn't do anything. The phrasing of someone who knows exactly what the question is pointing at and is deflecting it rather than answering it. He let it go. He looked at Hagrid's honest, worried face and decided that some things could wait for more information. That night, Harry lay in his bed in the Gryffindor dormitory and thought about the match. Not the win. The win was good, but the win was not what he was thinking about. He was thinking about the 4 minutes in the middle of it, when his broom had been wrong, when something had been acting on it from outside, when he had gripped the handle with his right hand and felt, in his left, curled loosely around his jacket pocket, pressing against it without quite reaching inside, the willow wand grow warm. Not the comfortable warmth it carried all the time. More than that. Present and specific, the warmth of something that has noticed you are in danger and doesn't have a way to say so out loud. He didn't know what that meant. He thought about Neville's grandmother's books and their phrase, an attentive relationship with the body. He thought about the wand learning him as it had learned his mother, the wood that suited her, that was choosing now to suit him, that apparently had opinions about when he was in danger, even when he wasn't asking for those opinions. He lay in the dark for a while, with the wand on the pillow next to his ear, warm and still, and did not know what to do with this information, except hold it carefully. Somewhere outside, the November wind moved over the castle. He slept. Christmas at Hogwarts was quiet in the way of large spaces that have been emptied of most of their noise. Most students had gone home. The castle did not go with them. It remained vast and stone and echoey in a way Harry found, to his own surprise, preferable to 4 days with the Dursleys eating nothing interesting and being told to stay out of Dudley's way. He had written to Hagrid, who had written back cheerfully, and to Ron, who had written back with a description of Christmas morning at the Weasley house that was so warm and chaotic it almost hurt to read. He had written to no one else because there was no one else to write to. He and Ron were among the very few Gryffindors who had stayed. They ate their meals at one end of the long Gryffindor table, while the enchanted ceiling above them cycled through grey December sky, and they opened their Christmas presents by the common room fire. And it was fine. It was more than fine, actually. It was the first Christmas in Harry's life when no one had told him what he was or wasn't allowed to want. He found the invisibility cloak among his presents. It was wrapped in ordinary brown paper with a card that bore no signature, only a single line in an unfamiliar hand. Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time it was returned to you. Use it well. Harry sat with it for a long time. He ran the fabric through his fingers. Soft, weightless, with a quality that made his hands look uncertain about whether they were there, and thought about his father. Not the legendary version, the specific version. The man who had owned this cloak, who had worn it, who had left it somewhere safe because he'd known there was a war, and you might need to be unseen in a war, and who had died at 31 and never gotten it back. He put it on. He vanished from the neck down. He looked at his floating head in the window glass and decided this was going to be useful for a number of things that he didn't yet have fully formed plans for. The castle at night, under the cloak, was different from the castle in daylight. Without the constant presence of other students, without the tide of voices and movement and class bells, it had a different quality, ancient and still and very large, with the particular atmosphere of somewhere that has been alive for 1,000 years and is not especially impressed by any individual version of the present. He wandered without a destination for 3 nights in a row. On the 4th night, he turned down a corridor he hadn't tried before and went through a door that was slightly ajar, and stopped. The mirror was enormous, tall as the ceiling, framed in tarnished gold, with a carved inscription running across the top that Harry leaned in to read. Erist stra eru, oit ube kafru, oit onvosi. Backward he read it again, and his lips moved. I show not your face, but your heart's desire. He had never seen anything like it. The frame was ornate in the manner of something very old and very serious, and the mirror's surface was not reflective in the way of ordinary mirrors. It had a depth to it, a quality of something seen rather than something bounced back. He stepped in front of it. He saw a crowd. Not immediately. For a moment, he saw only himself, small and pale in the high-ceiling darkness, wearing his father's invisibility cloak pushed back from his face. And then the image shifted, in the way of something focusing rather than something changing, and around him there were people. They shared his build, some of them, slight or dark-haired, or with a particular set to the jaw that he didn't see in himself, often, but had seen in a photograph once, of a man laughing, holding a broomstick in one hand. They were his people. He didn't know their faces, and he knew them completely, in the wordless way that belonging works when you've been kept from it long enough that seeing it lands like a shock, and at the center, close enough that her reflection's hand was on his shoulder. A woman. She was red-haired, not the mild reddish-brown that fades into something ordinary, but truly red, vivid, the red of something growing in good light. She had green eyes. His eyes, or rather, the right way around. He had hers. She was not young in the way he'd imagined she might be when he thought of her, which he'd only recently started allowing himself to do. She was real in a way photographs weren't, present and looking at him with an expression that no one had ever turned on Harry Potter in his waking life. She was looking at him like he mattered, not like he was famous, not like he was the boy who lived, or Lily's son, or the child left on a doorstep. Like he was himself, the specific person in front of her, whom she knew and was glad of. Harry could not breathe for a moment. He did not try, and then his eyes dropped to her hand. At her side, held loosely in the natural way of someone who has always had a wand and carries it without thinking. There was a wand. Pale wood, almost blonde in the mirror's light. He had seen that wood in one other place. He had held it. He had carried it home in brown paper, and he knew it the way he knew his own name. Willow, 10¼ inches, swishy, good for charm work. The wand she had bought when she was 11, from an old man with silver eyes who had remembered her for 20 years. His hand moved to his own wand before he knew it was moving. It was in his pocket, warm, as it always was. The new willow, the made thing, the Ollivander construction that had chosen him in the quietest possible way and had been warm in his hands ever since. He closed his fingers around it. In the mirror, his mother's reflection looked down. At his hand, at the wand in his pocket. And then she looked up at his face, and the reflection of her smiled. It was not a complicated smile. It was not the smile of someone who needed to explain something, or feared something, or had something to add. It was the smile of someone who had seen something that made her happy, in a place she had not expected to be happy, and had not bothered to hide it. Harry stood there for a very long time. He came back the next night, and the night after that. On the third night, Dumbledore was already in the room. He was sitting in a chair by the window, with the specific composure of someone who has been sitting in that chair long enough that the chair belongs to them. He was not reading. He was not doing anything in particular. He looked, when Harry took the cloak off, entirely unsurprised. "I thought I might find you here," Dumbledore said, in the mild tone of someone making a reasonable observation. Harry stood very still for a moment, and then decided that running was not going to help, and went to stand near the mirror, which he did not look at directly. "What do you see?" Dumbledore asked. Harry looked at the mirror. His family was there again. The crowd, the faces, the woman at the center. He looked at her for a moment, and at the wand in her hand, and at the way she was looking at him. "My family," he said. My mother. He paused. She's holding a wand. Like mine, same wood. Willow. Dumbledore said nothing for a moment. He looked at Harry with the attention of someone for whom attention is a deliberate act, something given rather than something that simply happens. "And what do you feel," he said, "when you see her?" Harry considered this. He had not, until this moment, thought to put a name to it. He'd been too occupied with just looking. "Like I did something right," he said, "in the shop, when I asked for the willow wand." He stopped. He was not sure he meant to have said that much. "Like she knows," he added, more quietly. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment, the sort of quiet that has been chosen. "The mirror," he said at last, "shows us the deepest and most desperate desire of our hearts. It has ruined men who were not careful with it. Men who wanted things that could not be, who sat where you are sitting, night after night, reaching through glass for what was never coming back." He paused. "You see your family. Not power, not revenge, not safety." Another pause, this one with something in it Harry couldn't quite read. "Your mother's hand on your shoulder." "Yes," Harry said. "That is not a small thing, Harry." He used his name without the Mr. Potter, and it landed differently, not more formal, but more direct, as if he were speaking to the specific person, rather than the general case. "It does not do," Dumbledore said, "to dwell on dreams and forget to live. I say this not as a dismissal of what you see. Quite the opposite. But the mirror is not a substitute for her. It is a reflection of what you already carry." He looked at Harry steadily. "And you carry quite a lot for someone your age." Harry looked at the mirror one more time. His mother was still there, still smiling. He looked at her wand, his wood, and at her green eyes that were the same as his, and at the hand she had placed on the shoulder of the reflection of him. "The mirror will be moved," Dumbledore said, "to a new home. I wouldn't look for it." Harry nodded. He understood. He took one last look and then looked away. He left Dumbledore in the room with the mirror. He did not look back. Dumbledore sat in the chair and looked at the glass for a long moment after the boy's footsteps had receded down the corridor. He knew about the willow wand. He had known since September, when the term began, and Harry Potter arrived at Hogwarts with an unexpected wand in his pocket and a particular intentionality about him that Dumbledore had found, privately, striking. He had said nothing about it. Not to Snape, who would feel things he couldn't afford to feel. Not to anyone. He thought about the other wand, the holly wand, 11 inches, phoenix feather, sitting in Ollivander's in a cardboard box on a shelf, unchosen, unmatched. The twin connection it carried quiet, because the wand that would have answered it was somewhere in the Scottish Highlands in a boy's robe pocket. He thought about the graveyard he had already, in some part of his long and careful mind, planned for. He did not know, with certainty, whether the severed connection was a problem or a correction. He had his calculations. He had had them since October 1981, and the calculations had always been provisional, adjusted and adjusted again as the variables shifted. A willow wand in a holly wand's place. A boy who had reached for his mother and found something that chose him. The twin connection. Not formed. Whatever had been supposed to happen in a graveyard years from now, the terrible accident of two connected wands locked against each other, would not happen this way. That was a loss of a kind. And a change of a kind. Whether either was preferable was not yet knowable. He did not know everything, despite what people assumed. He sat until the fire burned low, and then he rose and went to make other arrangements for the mirror, and thought as he walked that the deepest and most desperate desire of Harry Potter's heart was to have done something right by a woman he'd never met, and that this was either very moving or very useful or both, and that either way it was not nothing. Harry went back to the dormitory. He took the willow wand from his pocket and set it on the nightstand. The stone dormitory was dark and quiet, and Ron was asleep, and the castle outside the windows was full of December cold. He closed his eyes. He thought of red hair. He thought of a smile that had not needed to explain itself. He thought of a pale wand held loosely in a hand at someone's side, carried without thought, because it had always been there. He slept. January came in grey and cold and academically remorseless. The holiday quiet was gone. The castle filled back up over a single afternoon. Students arriving from the carriages in clumps, trailing trunks and owls, re-establishing the particular noise and movement that Harry had not noticed missing until it returned, and the work resumed immediately, as though the term had not so much paused as held its breath. Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Neville fell into the rhythms of the spring term without particular ceremony. Lessons, meals, Quidditch practice, the library on evenings when the assignment load demanded it. Ron played chess, Hermione read. Harry flew when the weather allowed, and worked on not thinking too hard about the mirror of Erised, which Dumbledore had told him had been moved, and which Harry took, with some effort, as advice rather than deprivation. He was in the library on a Thursday evening in late January, working on a herbology essay with the focused concentration of someone who understands the assignment without particularly enjoying it, when Neville Longbottom settled in across from him, with a stack of his own notes and a look of patient determination. They worked in approximate, companionable silence for a while. This was a comfortable silence, the kind that has no particular requirement attached to it, where being in the same room is sufficient and conversation is optional. Harry had learned that Neville was good at this kind of quiet. He didn't fill space unnecessarily. He was, in some fundamental way, a settled person, despite everything that had been done to unsettle him, and Harry found this restful in a way he hadn't expected to. Hermione was at a table across the library, with what appeared to be 5 books open simultaneously, which was not unusual. Ron was in the common room playing chess against someone willing, which was also not unusual. Neville reached for his wand. He needed to check a date in the margin of his notes. A small illumination, just enough to read the cramped handwriting he'd made by candlelight 2 nights ago. He pointed his father's wand at the page and said, "Lumos." A dull spark, barely a flicker. He tried again. "Lumos." A slightly more ambitious fizzle, which died. Harry watched without comment. He'd been watching Neville's wand difficulties all term with the growing understanding of someone who has learned enough to see what the problem is, and not enough to know how to say it without being intrusive. The wand was a walnut. He thought it was walnut from the colour, though he hadn't asked, and it was heavier than Neville's hand wanted it to be, and it had the quality of something that was doing its best without really committing. "It's never quite worked," Neville said, without particular inflection. He set the wand on the table and looked at it, the way you look at a disagreement that has been running too long to be interesting. "My father's wand. It's never quite worked for me." "I know," Harry said. Neville glanced at him. Not sharply, just noting that Harry had said so. "My grandmother says I just need to practice. My father was an aura. She thinks using his wand is," he seemed to look for the word, "an honor, that it matters. And I suppose it does. But it doesn't. It's not—" He stopped. "It's not yours?" Harry said. "No," Neville said simply. He said it the way he said most things that were true and difficult, without drama, The way you report weather. He's in St. Mungo's. He can't tell me whether he'd want me to use it or not. My grandmother decided. She's usually right about things. He picked up the wand and turned it over once. I don't argue with her. Harry looked at the wand. He had never touched another person's wand. It felt wrong in the way of handling someone else's private correspondence. But he could see what it was from across the table. Dense and heavy, and built for someone with a particular relationship to power and combat, which described an aura, and did not describe Neville Longbottom, who was excellent at herbology, and patient and careful, and struggled with a dull spark at Lumos. He thought about Ollivander saying the wand chooses the wizard. He thought about what Neville's grandmother had chosen instead. He picked up his own wand. He was going to demonstrate, show Neville what a working Lumos looked like, compare the light quality, something useful. He held the willow wand up and formed the intention. Not the word, just the shape of the intention. The way he had been thinking through spells all term, which was not quite saying them, and not quite not saying them. Somewhere in the space between thought and speech, where intentions live before they become actions. The wand lit. Quiet, warm, clear. The specific warm white light that the willow wand produced, which was not the sharp blue-white of a standard Lumos, but something softer, the light of something alive rather than something ignited. He had not said the word. He had not finished forming the intention. The wand had gotten there before him, had read the direction of his thinking, and completed the motion on its own. And now it was lit in his hand, and he was staring at it with the expression of someone who has been surprised by their own hand. Neville stared at it. Harry said, "Lumos," out loud, belatedly and somewhat pointlessly. The light was already there. Across the library, he heard a book close. Hermione appeared at the table. She had not walked quickly. She never walked quickly. She considered the appearance of urgency undignified. But she appeared with the purposefulness of someone who has just witnessed something worth investigating. She looked at Harry's wand. She looked at his face. She looked at the wand again. "Did you speak?" she said. "After," Harry said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Have you been practicing non-verbal spell work?" "No, you didn't speak the incantation." "I know." She pulled out the chair beside him and sat down with the focused expression of a person organizing information. "Non-verbal spell work is advanced magic," she said carefully, "not taught until upper years, well above first year. The theory is that you have to develop a sufficiently precise, intentional relationship with your wand before it can respond to direction without verbal trigger. Most witches and wizards can't do it at all without extensive practice." She paused. "You're 11. "I know," Harry said again. He looked at the lit wand in his hand. Its warmth was present and steady, the warmth it always had. But there was something in the quality of it now that felt more awake than usual, more present, like a thing that has been moving gradually toward a position and has now arrived. "I don't think I'm doing it," he said. "I think the wand is." Those aren't separate things exactly," Hermione said. She frowned at the wand in the way she frowned at a problem that had more variables than she'd initially estimated. Then, "It's the willow, isn't it? It doesn't wait." It was not a guess. Her voice had the register of confirmation, something she had already read and was now seeing demonstrated. Harry looked at her. "You've read about this?" "Ollivander's notes," she said. "The ones in the library. He writes that willow wands have a particular affinity for, he calls it proactive resonance, that they respond to the intent before the instruction, that they're more sensitive to an established bond than other woods." She paused. You've had this wand since August. That's 5 months. For a willow wand, apparently, that's enough time. Neville was looking at his own wand on the table. He didn't say anything. Harry was about to say something. He wasn't sure what. Something about what proactive resonance felt like from the inside, which was approximately like being heard before you'd finished your sentence, when the library door opened. He did not see Snape until Hermione's eyes moved. She noticed first. She noticed everything first, by virtue of being constitutionally alert to her surroundings, and whatever she saw in the doorway made her stop in the middle of what she'd been about to say. Her gaze went to Harry's wand, still lit, held up where it had been visible from across the room, and then to the door. And then, briefly, she did something unusual. She did nothing. She sat very still and said nothing, and waited. Snape had stopped in the doorway. He had the look of someone who had not expected to find what he found. Not shock, because Snape's face did not do shock, but a particular quality of stillness that was distinct from his ordinary stillness, in the way that ice is distinct from cold stone. He was looking at Harry's wand, pale willow, lit from within, held up in the hand of an 11-year-old who had not spoken the incantation. He stood in the doorway for 3 seconds. Harry counted afterward, because it was the kind of thing you count when you're not sure what just happened. Then Snape left. He did not enter the library. He turned without speaking and went back into the corridor, and the door swung slowly closed behind him. The silence in the library was the silence of a room that has just had something pass through it. "What was that?" Harry said. Hermione picked up her book from the table where she'd set it, and stood. "Professor Snape," she said. "He comes to the library sometimes in the evenings. He probably wanted a book." She went back to her own table. She did not tell him what she had seen in Snape's face. She had filed it in the same place she filed other things that were true and complicated, and not yet hers to share, in the back of her mind, in a category that had been growing since September, in a folder she had mentally labeled with Snape's name and kept closed. She would think about it for a long time. She did not say so. Harry looked at his wand. The light was still on. He murmured, "Nox," and it went out. "Why did you choose it?" Neville said. He was still looking at his own wand on the table. "Willow. Why did you choose Willow?" Harry considered how much to say. He had gotten better at this, over the months, at deciding which true things he was ready to say aloud, and which ones he was still carrying in the private space behind his sternum. He said the short version. "I asked Ollivander about my mother's wand. She had a willow one. I asked if he could make me something like it." Neville absorbed this. He nodded once, slowly, the way he nodded when something made sense to him that had been confusing before. "You chose it because of her," he said. "More or less," Harry said. "I didn't choose mine," Neville said. "My grandmother chose it. She said my father would have wanted me to use it, that it was the right thing." He looked at the walnut wand without particular expression. "I've never thought of it as mine. It's his. I'm borrowing it." "You could go back to Ollivander's," Harry said. "Get your own." Neville was quiet for a moment. He looked at the wand the way Harry sometimes looked at things that had a cost to them, with the recognition that a right thing and an easy thing are not always the same thing. "That would be admitting my grandmother made a mistake," he said. "I've never managed to do that." He paused. "She's not wrong about most things." "Is she wrong about this one?" "Yes," Neville said, simply, and with no particular drama. He picked up the walnut wand and turned it over. "But she's not wrong about much else. And she's done everything. Since they went to St. Mungo's, she's done everything herself. He set the wand down. I don't argue with her. Harry didn't push. He understood something about that, about the ledger of what you owe people who have carried you, and the things you don't say, because the things you'd have to say them to have already given enough. They finished the herbology essay in a silence that was not quite the same as the silence before, but was close enough. Walking back to the dormitory, Harry noticed the willow wand flicker on twice without his meaning to. He was thinking about Neville's father's wand, borrowed without permission from a man who wasn't able to give it. He was thinking about Ollivander in the back of the shop, making something new out of pale wood and an unnamed core. Because the original was gone, and someone had asked, the wand lit the corridor briefly each time. He did not try to stop it. He let it light and fade, as he walked back through the stone passages toward the tower, and the warmth of it was steady and familiar in his fingers, and the darkness of the corridor closed comfortably around him wherever the light went out. The egg arrived the way most things arrived in Hagrid's hut, as a fait accompli, already decided, not especially interested in anyone's opinion about it. "Isn't she beautiful?" Hagrid said. Harry looked at the large black egg sitting in the middle of Hagrid's fireplace, resting on a pile of logs that were clearly meant to replicate the conditions of somewhere considerably hotter than the Scottish Highlands. The egg was about the size of a quaffle and had the quality of a thing that was trying very hard to look like a rock. It was not very convincingly a rock. "Hagrid," Hermione said, in the voice she used when facts were being ignored in her presence. "That's a dragon egg." "Well, keeping a dragon in Great Britain is illegal under the Warlocks' Convention of 1709. She said this with the patience of someone who has read all the relevant legislation and finds it exasperating when others have not. It has been illegal for 282 years. This is not an obscure prohibition. "She's harmless right now," Hagrid said, with the serene confidence of someone who believes all living things can be managed with sufficient affection. "She will not always be right now," Harry said. He was looking at the egg with the practical attention of someone considering logistics. "How big do they get?" "Oh, enormous," Hagrid said happily. Ron, who had been sitting on a stool by the door and working something through in his mind, said, "Norwegian Ridgeback, yeah?" He squinted at the egg. "My brother would know what to do with it. He works with them, dragons, in Romania, at a reserve." He caught Hermione's expression. "I'm just saying, in the hypothetical, that if someone had a hypothetical Norwegian Ridgeback egg, there are hypothetical people who handle this sort of thing." "Your brother in Romania," Harry said. "Exactly." Hermione looked between them with the expression of someone who has just noticed that a plan is forming around her without her input. "We are not keeping it," she said. "Nobody's keeping it," Harry said. "That's the point." They came back to check on it 3 times over the following week. Hagrid had named it Norbert before it had hatched, and he had named it with the same unhesitating certainty with which he named everything, as if the name were already true and the creature simply needed to confirm it by existing. On the 3rd visit, the egg cracked. Norbert was small in the way that things which will become enormous are small, compactly and densely small, already heavy, already clearly made of something substantial. His scales were nearly black. He breathed smoke in small experimental bursts almost immediately, the way a baby tests a new sound, and looked at Hagrid with the orange eyes of something that has just arrived and is assessing the situation. Hagrid was enchanted. He made sounds that Harry had never heard Hagrid make before, which were somewhere between enormous and gentle and completely unguarded. Hermione pulled Harry slightly aside and said quietly, "The reserve in Romania. "Can we write to your brother?" To Ron, who was watching the dragon with the expression of someone who has a brother who would say, "I told you so," and is going to have to write to him anyway. "I already did," Ron said. 3 days ago. He's coming next Saturday." The problem arose on Friday. Harry was in the library, working, when he noticed through the window a small figure coming away from the direction of Hagrid's hut at a speed that suggested they had seen something and were planning to be somewhere else before anyone could ask questions about it. The figure was pale-haired and moving with the particular purposefulness of someone delivering information. He did not act on what he'd seen immediately. He finished his page of notes and went to find Ron, and they went to Hagrid, and Hagrid's expression confirmed it before anyone spoke. A student had been at the window, had seen inside. "How much did they see?" Harry said. Hagrid's enormous hands were tight together. "Enough." They had one night. The plan was simple in the way of plans that have been assembled in 45 minutes. They would carry Norbert, in a crate, to the top of the astronomy tower, where Ron's brother in Romania was arriving at midnight by broomstick to collect him. The invisibility cloak would cover them, mostly. The cloak was large enough for 2 people with difficulty, or 3 if no one breathed deeply. The crate was the problem. The crate was not invisible. They waited until nearly midnight and then moved. Hagrid carried Norbert in the crate to the base of the tower and handed the crate to Harry with the expression of someone surrendering something they'd rather keep, which was accurate. He could not come further. Too large, too visible, too likely to wake something that shouldn't be woken. Harry took the crate with both hands, and he and Ron and Hermione went inside, Hermione holding the cloak over as much of them as it would cover. The tower staircase was stone and cold, and their footsteps were very loud in the silence. The crate was heavy, and Norbert shifted inside it periodically, and breathed smoke that leaked through the crate slats and smelled of something mineral and ancient. They went up 1 floor, 2 floors, 3. On the 4th landing, Harry heard footsteps below them. He held up a hand. They stopped. The footsteps below were regular and heavy. The footsteps of someone who walked the castle corridors at night with the authority of someone who was supposed to be there. They were coming up the stairs. How far below, Harry couldn't tell. 2 floors, maybe. Enough time to do something if he thought of something immediately, which he was trying to. He reached for his willow wand with his free hand. He had an idea, a distraction, a light somewhere else, a sound in the wrong corridor that would redirect attention. He gripped the wand and thought it. Light, far end of the lower corridor, just enough to draw the eye downward rather than upward, just enough to buy them 20 more seconds on the stairs. He did not say it. The wand cast it. He felt the warmth pulse along his fingers, not dramatic, not visible from where he stood, but purposeful. And somewhere 2 floors below and around a corner, a soft lumos flickered briefly in the wrong direction. The footsteps below stopped. A pause. Then they moved away, toward the light, away from the staircase. Harry let out a breath. They went up the remaining 2 floors without incident, and arrived at the top of the astronomy tower in the cold night air, and Ron's brother arrived 7 minutes later, on a broom with 2 of his colleagues, and Norbert was transferred from the crate into a larger container, with the efficiency of people who do this professionally, and then they were gone, south and east, into the dark above the mountains, and the night was quiet again. Harry stood at the top of the tower with his wand in his hand. He looked at it. It was warm again now. The crisis warmth had faded back into the ordinary warmth, the background note. Pale wood, familiar in his grip, entirely unchanged in its appearance. He had not spoken. He had formed the intention, and the wand had completed it. Not for the first time now, not since the library, but it was still not something he had expected or asked for, and the gap between expecting and receiving was where his unease lived. He was afraid of it. He recognized this now clearly, the way you recognize something you've been avoiding recognizing. He was afraid of the wand in the way you are afraid of something you don't understand, that is nevertheless close to you, that operates according to rules you haven't been given. He had chosen this wand because it was his mother's kind of wand. He had thought in the shop that he understood what he was reaching for. He had not known his mother. He had not known what her wand did when she wasn't asking it to. He had not known what it meant for a wand to have an attentive relationship with the body, to enable magic before the instruction, to go proactive in ways the wizard didn't plan. He had known the name of the wood and the approximate shape of what she had been, and he had made a decision with those two things, and the decision was still good, he thought. But what was growing out of it was larger than what he'd held in his hands in the summer. He didn't know if the wand was doing this. He didn't know if he was. He was starting to suspect there was no clean line between the two. He wrapped his fingers around it once, deliberately, and went back down the stairs. Hermione had remembered the cloak. Ron had not. In the press of the handoff and the cold night air and the departure of 4 broomsticks going south, neither of them had thought to pick it up from the corner of the tower where they'd set it down. They made it as far as the 3rd floor landing without it before the caretaker found them. He appeared from a side passage, a thin, suspicious-looking man with a tendency to treat the castle's corridors as personal property, and a cat named Mrs. Norris who had seen them coming from 3 corners away. He looked at Harry and Ron with the expression of someone whose ship has come in at last, after a long wait, and he took them and Neville, who had come to warn them about the caretaker and had been caught in the process, to Professor McGonagall, who was awake and dressed and fully capable of being disappointed in them at midnight with no diminishment of her ordinary standards. She took 50 points each. She assigned them detention in the Forbidden Forest. She said things about rule-breaking that were precise and unhurried, and made Harry feel, specifically and personally, that he had let someone down whose respect he had not fully appreciated until now. They went back to the dormitory. Ron fell asleep immediately. Harry lay awake. In the morning, Hagrid was outside his hut. He was sitting on the step with his knees up, and his hands hanging between them, which was not a comfortable position for a man of his size, and was not meant to be. Fang was beside him. The hut was very quiet. Hagrid had a piece of parchment in his hand, a letter from Romania, Harry supposed, confirming receipt, and he was holding it without reading it. Harry sat down on the step beside him. He did not say anything useful. He did not have anything useful to say. He sat in the early morning air while the Scottish spring worked uncertainly around them, and Hagrid was enormous and somehow small, and neither of them spoke for a while. Hagrid put his huge hand on Harry's shoulder. Just briefly. A single pat, the kind of gesture that means I know, and you're here, and that's enough. And then he took it away and looked at the mountains. In Harry's pocket, the willow wand grew warm. Not much, just a degree or 2. The specific warmth of something that has noticed an emotional state and responded to it the way it responded to a scraped palm on the practice pitch. Not with drama, not with intervention, just with a quiet presence that said, "This is something. I notice this. Healing is what it does," Neville's grandmother's book had said. And Harry thought, sitting on Hagrid's step, with the wand warm in his pocket, and the mountains grey above them, maybe healing is not only about injury. Maybe it is about anything that needs to ease. He went back inside when Hagrid did, eventually. He had herbology in an hour. He had detention in the Forbidden Forest next week. He had a wand in his pocket that was becoming something he hadn't planned on and couldn't entirely account for. He walked through the stone corridors and thought about his mother with a willow wand, and whether the wand had warmed in her pocket when she needed it to. He thought it probably had. He thought that was what it had always been for. Not the charms, not the non-verbal lumos in a dark stairwell, but this. The warmth when someone put their hand on your shoulder and you needed it to mean something. Nice wand for charm work, Ollivander had said. Harry put his hand in his pocket and wrapped it around the warmth and went to class. The Forbidden Forest did not want to be entered. This was not a metaphorical assessment. It was the straightforward impression of every person who had stood at its edge and looked in, which was the impression the trees intended. They were very old and very tall, and they had opinions about visitors. Harry had this impression, standing at the tree line, with a lantern in one hand and the willow wand in the other, while Hagrid divided them into groups with the air of someone organizing a task that would be fine, and had been fine many times before, which was Hagrid's general orientation toward large, dangerous animals and dark forests, and most categories of risk. "You four," Hagrid said to Harry, Neville, and the party overall, "will go in pairs. Hermione, Ron, you take the left path. I'll take Harry and Neville on the right. You see any tracks? You call for me. You don't follow anything by yourselves. Clear?" "Clear," Hermione said. She didn't look happy about the left path. She looked at Harry briefly, with the expression of someone making a note of where he was going to be. And then she and Ron took the left path with their lantern, and then they were in the trees, and gone, and the forest swallowed them. Hagrid led Harry and Neville right. The forest was very dark past the tree line. The lantern cast light in a small radius, and outside that radius the darkness was complete. Not the comfortable darkness of a room with the curtains drawn, but the working darkness of a place that has never been lit, that does not consider light its natural state. The trees were enormous, roots above the ground, bark rough and pale in the lantern glow, branches knitted overhead into something too dense to call canopy. They made sounds that were not wind. Things moved at the edges of the light. Neville stayed close to Harry without appearing to try. He had his father's wand out. He held it the way he held it in the library, gripped with practiced accommodation. And its light, when he attempted it, was dull. Dim enough to be worse than no light, because it showed you just enough to know you couldn't see. Harry did not mention this. Hagrid moved with the comfortable ease of someone who has been in this forest hundreds of times and considers it familiar territory, which it was for him, and was emphatically not for them. He pointed out tracks. He named things in the undergrowth by sound. He was a good person to be frightened near, because his scale of comparison for frightening things was so different from everyone else's that he rendered the merely alarming into the merely interesting. "There," he said, and stopped. The clearing opened in front of them without warning. One step the trees were solid overhead, and then they weren't, and there was sky, and in the middle of the sky was a unicorn. Or rather, what had been a unicorn. It was on its side in the grass, silver blood pooled around it, its coat still luminous even in death with the specific quality of something whose nature persists beyond the moment that ended it. Harry had not known, until this moment, that a dead thing could be beautiful. The two categories had seemed straightforward to him. Beauty was for living things, death was for the other thing. But the unicorn in the clearing made him understand they could coexist, and the coexistence was worse than either alone. He stood at the edge of the clearing and looked. Neville made a small sound. He had gone very still in the way he went still when something was too much. Not paralysis, but a kind of internal bracing. He was gripping his father's wand with both hands. Hagrid crouched beside the unicorn and looked at it with the expression of someone making an assessment they don't want to be making. The silver blood reflected the lantern. He touched the unicorn's flank once, lightly, and then took his hand away. "What did this?" Harry said. "Something that needed to," Hagrid said, which was not an answer. Harry looked at the unicorn and then at the tree line on the far side of the clearing, and he noticed, at the edge of the lantern's reach where the darkness began, movement. A figure, hooded, moving slowly toward the unicorn from the other side of the clearing, low to the ground at first, as though it had been crouching, and then upright. Taller than Harry had expected, moving with a strange quality that was wrong in a way he couldn't immediately name. Not limping, not dragging. Moving in a way that suggested each step was slightly effortful, as though whatever was inside the figure was not entirely accustomed to the form. It had not looked at Harry. It was moving toward the unicorn's body with the focused purpose of something that knows what it came for. Harry's hand went to his willow wand. Not to cast anything, just reflex. The same reflex that had been building all year. The wand as the first thing he reached for when something was wrong. The wand was cold. He stopped. He had felt the wand warm. Warmth was its whole vocabulary. Warmth for comfort, and warmth for readiness, and warmth for healing, and even the specific warmth of alarm when his broom had been bucked above the pitch. Warmth in every register it knew. He had never felt it cold. It was cold now in a way that was not the cold of the night air or the cold of his fingers. It was the specific cold of something living that has stopped, the cold of something that has lost its direction because the direction has been removed. He pulled it out and looked at it. Pale willow in the lantern light, pale and entirely still, and cold in his palm, the way a stone is cold that has been in the dark for a long time. He did not understand what this meant. He didn't have the framework. He knew, from Hermione, that the wand had healing properties, that it was warm because it was responsive to bodies, to injury, to distress. He knew it went warm in crisis. He did not know what its absence of warmth meant until he was standing in the clearing with the dead unicorn and the hooded figure and the wand cold in his hand, and something in his chest understood before his mind caught up. The wand was reaching and finding nothing. No body to respond to. No life to attend. Whatever was inside the hooded figure was not alive in any sense the wand knew how to touch. The figure turned, or a part of it turned. The hood came around, not the whole body, and Harry got an impression of a face before his eyes refused to clarify it, the way your eyes refuse to look directly at certain kinds of light. Something shifted at the edge of his vision, pale and wrong, and looking at him with a quality of attention that was not curiosity, and was not threat, and was simply, "There you are." Harry could not move. Then hoofbeats, and Firenze came through the tree line. He was white, grey-white in the manner of something that moves at the edges of human perception. And he was fast. He came into the clearing with the urgent purposefulness of something that has decided to intervene and has no time for introduction. And he was between Harry and the hooded figure before Harry had processed the approach, and his voice, when he spoke, had the quality of the forest at a remove. Deep and not quite human and entirely certain. "Up," he said to Harry. "Now." Hagrid is not in danger. Up." Harry did not argue with this. He got himself onto Firenze's back with the undignified scramble of a person who has never ridden anything without a saddle, and Firenze moved immediately, not back the way Harry had come, but sideways, through the trees, at a speed that suggested this path had been decided in advance. Behind them, Harry heard the clearing go silent. Neville's voice, distant. "Harry?" Hagrid's voice, closer but muffled by the trees. Then they were deep in the forest, and the clearing was behind them, and Firenze had slowed to a walk through the undergrowth, and Harry sat on his back and held the pale willow wand in both hands, and looked at it. It was warming again, gradually, the way warmth returns. Not all at once, but in degrees, the temperature coming back into the wood the way colour comes back into a face. He watched it happen. Firenze spoke. He did not look back at Harry while he spoke. He watched the trees and the gaps between them, where the sky was visible. He said things about the stars that Harry didn't have the context to understand. He said that what Harry had seen in the clearing was a thing that had unmade itself in its hunger for continuance, and that it was in the castle, and that it had been in the castle for some time, and that the stars had been noting its position for months. He said that Harry would need to understand the stars. He said that there were things moving that could not be stopped by knowledge alone, but could not be survived without it. Harry listened and remembered as much as he could. He thought, something is in the castle that should not be in the castle. He thought, the hooded figure in the clearing is connected to something at Hogwarts. He thought, my wand went cold. He filed these things in the same place he had filed Hagrid's wouldn't do anything to Harry, and Snape's 3-second pause in the library doorway, in the growing collection of things he didn't have enough context to interpret, but which were accumulating toward something he would need to understand. Firenze set him down at the edge of the forest near Hagrid's hut and walked back into the dark without further explanation, the way centaurs apparently did things. Hagrid came out of the forest 15 minutes later with Neville, who looked like someone who had recently decided to reassess his opinion of danger, and was still in the process of reassessing it. Hagrid said very little. He made them tea, which they both drank, and he looked at Harry twice over the course of it, with the specific expression of a man who wants to say something, and has decided not to. Harry's wand was warm on the table beside his mug, entirely warm, back to its ordinary note, as though the clearing had not happened. But he knew what cold felt like now. He knew the difference between the wand's presence and its absence, between the warmth that meant something alive and the silence that meant the opposite. He had not known, before tonight, that a wand could tell you something through going still. He lay in his bed that night with the willow wand on his nightstand, pale in the moonlight coming through the dormitory window. He looked at it for a long time. For the first time since August, it had told him something without warmth. He turned this over in the dark, the cold in his palm, the way the wand had reached and found nothing, the hooded figure's face that he had not quite been able to look at directly. Something in the castle, something that made his wand forget how to be warm. He did not know what it was yet. He would know soon. It was Hermione who worked it out, not the fact of the stone, which they had established weeks ago, but the fact of tonight. Snape had been at the forest detention. He had been limping since. Hagrid had let slip something about a 3-headed dog and a man named Flamel, and a corridor on the 3rd floor that was out of bounds for a reason, and Hermione had taken these 3 separate pieces and assembled them into a conclusion, while Harry and Ron were still working through the individual components. He's going to take it tonight, she said. Whoever it is. I think tonight. Harry thought about the hooded figure in the clearing, about his wand going cold, about Firenze saying there are things moving that cannot be survived without knowledge, and Harry had not had enough knowledge then. But he had more now, and what he had was pointing at the 3rd floor corridor. Professor McGonagall sent them back to their dormitory. She said this firmly and with authority, and without any indication that she found their concerns credible, and then she turned away and the conversation was finished, and Harry stood in the corridor with Ron and Hermione and understood that the adults had made a decision about what this was and what it required, and that the decision was wrong. They went upstairs. They waited until the corridor was quiet. Then they came back down. The third-floor corridor at midnight was different from the third-floor corridor in daylight, which was itself different from what lay behind the locked door. The door was not locked now. It opened to Harry's hand, and beyond it was the smell of something enormous that breathed, and the three-headed dog. Fluffy was awake, all three heads, all 6 eyes, all the concentrated attention of something very large that has been lying in a room for an undetermined length of time with nothing to think about except the door. The left head growled. The right head was already watching them. The middle head was angling toward Harry with the specific focus of something that has concluded he is the most relevant thing in the room. Harry had not planned this. He had the willow wand in his hand before he was conscious of reaching for it. Reflex by now, and he thought. Sound. Music. Something that settles. He had read once, somewhere in the accumulation of a year's worth of castle knowledge, that music had effects on things that brute force did not. He thought it the way he had been thinking spells all year, in the space between intention and instruction. The wand hummed. Not loudly. A low, sustained sound, the specific quality of a charm pitched for resonance rather than force. It came from the wand without his speaking, the way the Lumos had come in the library and on the tower staircase. Proactive, the word Hermione had used, from Ollivander's notes. The wand leaned into the moment, the way it always leaned into charm work. Immediately and entirely, and without drama. Fluffy's eyes grew heavy. The left head dipped, the middle head dipped. The right head resisted for a moment, tracking Harry with the stubbornness of something that knows it's supposed to stay awake. And then it too settled, and the great body relaxed, and the trapdoor was accessible. They went through. What followed was fast and not easy, and required each of them to be exactly what they were. Devil's snare closed around them in the darkness, and Hermione said, "Stop moving," with the controlled authority of someone who has read about this, and then light with equal control, and it recoiled. The flying keys were a seeker's problem. Harry found the right one, battered and trailing a bent wing, before anyone had to explain the geometry of it to him. The chess game was Ron's. He looked at the board for 30 seconds with the concentrated attention he gave to chess, and no other subject. And then he moved his pieces with the quiet certainty of someone who has already seen 6 moves ahead. "You have to go on," Ron said. His horse had taken the blow. He was pale, but his voice was steady. "Go. I'll be here." "Ron, I'll be fine. Hermione stays with me. You go." Harry looked at them. Hermione had her arms around herself, in the way she did when she was frightened, and refusing to show it. And Ron was managing the specific composure of someone who has decided they are going to be all right, even before they know it's true. He had become, over the course of a year, the person Harry would most want beside him in a difficult situation. He was staying behind. Harry went on. "The potion room." Hermione read the logic and named the solution in the time it took Harry to read the note twice. He took the vial she handed him, drank it, cold, the cold of something decided, and stepped through the flame. The final chamber was lit from above with a sourceless grey light, the kind of light that exists everywhere and casts no shadows. The mirror of Erised stood against the far wall. In front of it stood the Dada professor. He was not moving. He was looking at the mirror with the specific stillness of someone who has been standing there for some time and has not gotten what they came for. He heard Harry comes in. He turned. Harry had seen the Dada professor turn around in class many times, had learned the economy of his movements, the slight stammer when he spoke, the permanent quality of apology he carried. What he saw now was the back of the Dada professor's head, and then, as the turban came unwound by degrees in the wavering light, a face that was not the Dada professor's face, a flat, pale face on the back of a skull, with red eyes that had no warmth in them, and never had, and a voice like something being scraped across stone. "Harry Potter." The voice was cold in the specific way of the wand in the forest, a cold that was not temperature, but the absence of something that should be there. Harry held his willow wand at his side. He held it because he had held it all year, and the holding was, by now, a reflex and a comfort, and he had both in this room and needed both. The voice said, "Give me the stone." Harry said nothing. The red eyes moved to the wand. They stayed there for a moment, noting the pale wood, the unfamiliar wood, the wand that was not holly, not 11 inches, not the wand that some portion of the world had expected Harry Potter to carry. The voice said nothing about this. The voice did not know, could not know, what wand had been expected and what wand had been refused in a shop on a summer afternoon. There was no recognition in those red eyes of an absence or a presence. There was only contempt. A child in a chamber with an unusual pale wand and no apparent plan, standing between Lord Voldemort and a small red stone. Contempt was a kind of misjudgment. "Take it from him," the voice said. The Dada professor moved. Harry had the wand up before the man reached him. He had been tracking the distance all along, the way you track distance in Quidditch. Body awareness, the space between things, where everything was going to be in the next half-second. He thought, Wingardium Leviosa. He thought, anything. He thought, the wand is good at charms. The wand knows charms. The wand will... The Dada professor's hands closed on Harry's arm. The wand sent a levitation charm into the air that moved nothing, and hit nothing, and served no tactical purpose whatsoever. Harry registered this distantly. His arm was on fire. Not actually fire, but the quality of contact that shouldn't be happening, the quality of a grip by someone whose skin was blistering the moment it touched his. The man screamed. High and terrible, and not quite the Dada professor's voice. He pulled his hands back. Harry understood in one clear thought that this was not the wand. The wand was not doing this. The warm thing in his hand, pale and already burning with the particular warmth it had burned with all year, was doing its job. It had sent its charm. It was ready for the next instruction. But the burning on the Dada professor's hands, the screaming, the inability to hold him. That was something else. Something that had been there since before he knew about wands. Something older. He grabbed the man's wrist. He grabbed it because holding on was all he had left, and the man's hands were blistering where they touched him, and all he needed to do was not let go. And the willow wand was in his other hand, and the warmth of it was enormous now, flooding up his arm. And he did not know if it was the wand doing this or him doing this, or something his mother had embedded in his skin 10 years ago, when she made a choice with her arms rather than her wand. It was not the wand that saved him. It was never going to be the wand. The face on the back of the Dada professor's head was gone. Something that might have been a shape passed through the room, a cold draught, a sense of passing. And the man crumpled, and Harry went down with him, and the stone chamber went dark. He woke in the hospital wing. He knew it was the hospital wing before he opened his eyes, because of the quality of the light, and the specific smell of the linen, and the particular silence of a room that has been occupied by someone recovering. He opened his eyes, and Dumbledore was sitting in the chair beside his bed. "Good afternoon," Dumbledore said, in the tone of someone who finds this development satisfying. Harry looked at the ceiling, then at Dumbledore. "The stone," he said. "Safe," Dumbledore said. "The Data Professor." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "Gone," he said, with a simplicity that covered a great deal. "And the one who was wearing him." Harry thought about the red eyes. He thought about the cold in the forest, the wand going still. He thought about the face on the back of a skull, and the voice, like scraped stone, saying his name. Gone, retreated. The word Dumbledore used, rather than defeated, because this was not yet over, and Dumbledore was accurate about things. "The stone's keeper," Harry said. "What will happen?" "The keeper has enough time to put their affairs in order," Dumbledore said. "They chose this a long time ago." He said it gently and without sentimentality. "And the Data Professor. Did he know what he was doing?" "Some of it," Dumbledore said. "Not all of it. He made choices that led somewhere he didn't fully understand, and then it was too late. This is more common than you might hope." Harry looked at the ceiling again. He felt the way he felt after the Quidditch match, wrung out and present simultaneously, all the adrenaline spent and the ordinary world coming back in. "You came," he said. "Not an accusation, just noting it." "As quickly as I could," Dumbledore said. "You had nearly finished the situation by then." He paused. Then, in a slightly different register, "You did very well with the mirror." "I just wanted to find it," Harry said. "I didn't need to use it. I just wanted it not to be used." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "That is the distinction." His eyes moved. They moved to the nightstand, where the willow wand lay on the white surface in the afternoon light, pale and quiet. Dumbledore looked at it for a long moment, longer than the situation required, longer than the ordinary glance of someone noting an object on a surface. He did not say what he was thinking. He looked at the wand the way Harry had seen people look at photographs of someone who was gone. Not seeing the object, seeing through it. Then he said, without preamble and without explanation, "Your mother would have done exactly what you did. Not because of the wand." He paused. "Because of who she was." Harry looked at him. Dumbledore did not explain. He did not elaborate, or qualify, or add the coda that would have made the statement a lesson. He simply said it, and then he sat back in his chair. And that was all. Harry did not ask him to explain. He wasn't ready for the explanation. He understood part of it, that the burning was Lily's, that the wand had been with him, and not the reason, and the rest he would be ready for eventually, at some later point, and he would find someone to ask. Ron and Hermione came. Ron brought chess pieces. He set them on the nightstand next to Harry's wand, and didn't comment on either thing, which was typical Ron and was exactly right. He sat on the edge of the bed and said, "Brilliant, going down there by yourself," in the tone of someone who means it as a compliment, and is also a little put out to have missed it. Hermione had a book under her arm. Harry noticed it, a small dark volume with gold lettering on the spine that he could see was about wand lore. She sat in the chair Dumbledore had vacated and put the book on her knee, face down. She did not open it. She had been going to say something about the non-verbal charm in the chamber, the levitation spell he'd cast while he'd been grabbed. She had clearly been going to say something about it since she'd heard, because she had read about it and had formed a conclusion and was ready to state the conclusion with citation. She looked at Harry in the hospital bed and put the book down. "How are you feeling?" she said. "All right," Harry said. She nodded. The book stayed closed. She had decided it could wait. Later, after Ron had fallen asleep in the chair and Hermione had gone back to the dormitory, and the ward was quiet in the long afternoon, Harry lay in the hospital bed and looked at the wand on the nightstand. Pale willow in the late light, warm even from a distance in the specific way that was not visible but was present, that he had been feeling since August, since the back room of a narrow shop and a man with silver eyes retreating to a workbench. He had carried it down corridors and into a forest, and onto a broomstick, and through a trap door, and into a chamber, where a stone floor and a mirror and a face on the back of a skull had all been waiting. He had held it while his mother's magic worked through his skin and saved him. It had not saved him. It had been with him. He picked it up. He thought about a summer morning in Diagon Alley, the dust of Ollivanders, the holly wand warm in his hand with its red and gold sparks, and the thing that had made him set it down. Not the warmth, not the rightness, but the reaching, the specific reach toward something he didn't have a name for yet. He had known he was choosing something of his mother's. He had not known he was choosing something that would warm in the dark, and cool in the forest, and light without being asked, and hold steady while something worse than danger was in the room. He had not known what she felt when she held a willow wand for the first time, 11 years old in Ollivander's shop. He did not know now. He would never know. But he thought she had felt something like this. The specific warmth of something that had chosen you not for who you were yet, but for who you were going to be, for the potential you didn't know you had, for the reaching you didn't know was courage. She had been 21. She had been brilliant at charms, Slughorn's favourite, muggle-born and exceptional, gone before he could remember her face. She had held a willow wand for 10 years, and she had built a life with it, and protected him with something older than wand lore, and she had never known she was teaching him anything. He held the wand in the afternoon light. He thought about the mirror, his mother's smile when she looked from her wand to his. He thought about Hagrid's step and the warmth in his pocket. He thought about the library in January and the light that came before the word. The willow wand was warm in his hand. It had been warm since August. It would be warm, he thought,